In the quiet village of St. Mary Mead, a glamorous dancer's body is found strangled in the library of Gossington Hall, shattering the peace of a grand manor. But when Miss Jane Marple, an unassuming spinster with a razor-sharp mind, digs deeper, she uncovers a chilling deception. A schoolgirl's murder disguised as the dancer's, a burned car hiding the truth, and a web of greed spun by lovers Mark Gaskell and Josie Turner. As secrets unravel and motives clash, only Marple can expose the killers before they strike again. Dive into a tale of betrayal, ambition, and deadly lies. Chapter 1. The Unwelcome Guest. The first light of dawn crept through the heavy curtains of Gossington Hall, casting a soft glow over the rolling lawns of St. Mary Mead. The village, nestled in its quiet English valley, stirred gently under a veil of mist, its thatched cottages and tidy hedgerows betraying no hint of the shock that awaited. Inside the hall, Mrs. Dolly Bantry, a woman of robust cheer and practical sensibilities, descended the polished oak staircase to the dining room, her mind on the day's small duties. A letter to her sister, a call to the vicar about the fete, perhaps a word with the cook about the evening's menu. Her husband, Colonel Arthur Bantry, retired and comfortably gruff, was already ensconced in his study, poring over the Times with a frown at the state of the world. The morning's calm shattered with a piercing scream from the direction of the library. Dolly, pausing with a teacup halfway to her lips, felt a prickle of unease. The housemaid Mary burst through the dining-room door, her cap askew, her face ashen. "Madam," she gasped, clutching the door frame. "Oh, madam, there's a body in the library." Her voice cracked and she swayed as if she might faint. Dolly set down her teacup with a clink, her practical nature asserting itself, despite the jolt. "A body? Nonsense, Mary! Pull yourself together. What do you mean?" But Mary's wide eyes and trembling hands were answer enough. Rising swiftly, Dolly followed the girl down the corridor, her footsteps muffled on the thick carpet. The library door stood ajar, and as Dolly pushed it open, the familiar scent of old leather and polished wood was overlaid with something sharper, something wrong. There, sprawled on the hearthrug before the unlit fireplace, lay a young woman. She was dressed in a cheap, glittering evening gown of pale pink satin, the kind more suited to a dance hall than a country manor. Her platinum blonde hair, artificially bright, fanned out in a grotesque halo, and her face, heavily made up with rouge and lipstick, was frozen in a rictus of surprise. One arm was flung out, the fingers curled as if grasping at something just out of reach. The marks on her throat, livid against her pale skin, told a story of violence that made Dolly's breath catch. "Good heavens!" Dolly murmured, her hand tightening on the doorframe. She stepped closer, careful not to disturb the scene, and noted the girl's youth, barely 18, she guessed, and the incongruity of her presence. Gossington Hall was no place for strangers, least of all one so garishly dressed and so unmistakably dead. "Who is she?" Dolly whispered, though she knew no answer would come from the silent figure. The commotion drew Colonel Bantry from his study. He appeared in the doorway, his moustache bristling, his eyes narrowing at the sight. "What the blazes is this?" he demanded, his voice rough with shock. He strode forward, then stopped short, his gaze fixed on the body. "Dolly, what's this girl doing here? I've never seen her in my life." "Nor have I," Dolly replied, her mind racing. She turned to Mary, who hovered near the door, wringing her hands. "Mary, fetch Dr. Haydock at once and tell him to bring the police. No one is to touch anything, do you understand?" Mary nodded, fleeing the room with a sob. As they waited, Dolly and Arthur stood in uneasy silence. The library's familiar comforts, the rows of leather-bound books, the heavy oak desk, the faded Persian rug, now tainted by the stranger's presence. "This is monstrous," Arthur muttered, pacing to the window. "A girl like that, in our house, it's unthinkable. What will people say?" Dolly, though equally shaken, felt a spark of resolve. "We'll find out who she is and what happened, Arthur. But we need help. This is beyond us." Her thoughts turned to her old friend Jane Marple, whose unassuming demeanour and sharp mind had unravelled more than one village mystery. "I'll send for Miss Marple," she said firmly. "She'll know what to do." Arthur grunted, his scepticism of that old spinster tempered by past experience. "Very well, but the police will handle this, Dolly. It's their job." Yet even as he spoke, the library seemed to close in around them, its shadows holding secrets that only someone like Miss Marple might unravel. Outside the mist was lifting, and St. Mary Mead began its day, unaware of the scandal brewing in its heart. In the library, the body of the unknown girl lay still, a silent challenge to the order of the world Dolly Bantry held dear. Chapter 2. The Arrival of Miss Marple. The clock in the hall of Gossington Hall struck 11, as a modest black taxi crunched up the gravel drive. Miss Jane Marple stepped out, her small figure bundled in a tweed coat, a knitted scarf tucked neatly at her throat and her ever-present black leather handbag dangling from one arm. To the casual observer, she was merely an elderly spinster, her white hair tucked under a sensible hat, her eyes mild behind steel-rimmed spectacles. But those who knew her, Dolly Bantry chief among them, recognized the keen intelligence that lurked beneath her unassuming exterior, sharp as a blade, hidden in a velvet sheath. Dolly met her at the door, her face a mixture of relief and agitation. "Jane, thank goodness you're here," she said, ushering her friend inside. "It's dreadful, simply dreadful. A girl, dead, in our library. Arthur's beside himself, and the police are trampling through everything." Miss Marple patted Dolly's arm, her touch light but reassuring. There, my dear. Tell me everything, and we shall see what's to be done." Her voice was soft, almost soothing, but her eyes darted about the entrance hall, noting the polished floor, the ancestral portraits, and the faint air of disruption that hung over the house. They settled in the morning room, where a fire crackled against the autumn chill. Over tea, Dolly recounted the morning's shock. Mary's scream, the garish figure on the library rug, the marks of strangulation. "She's not from the village, Jane. I'd know her at once if she were. Dr. Haydock says she was killed last night, some time after 10. But how did she get here? The doors were locked, the windows secure. It's as if she appeared from thin air." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression thoughtful. "Nothing appears from thin air, Dolly. Someone brought her, or she came herself, and that is where we must begin." She set down her cup with a delicate clink. "What do the police say?" Dolly sighed. "Inspector Slack's in charge. Such a rude man. all bluster and no manners. He's poking about the library now, questioning the staff. They've identified the girl, or so they think. Ruby Keene, a dancer from the Majestic Hotel in Danemouth. But why she'd be in our library of all places, no one can say. Ruby Keene, Miss Marple repeated, her fingers pausing on the handle of her handbag. A dancer, you say? Interesting. Her mind, ever nimble, conjured images of the Majestic Hotel, a place of glamour and transience where holiday-makers and opportunists mingled. She had visited it once, years ago, and recalled its glittering ballroom, its whispered intrigues. I must see the library, Dolly, and then, perhaps, this Inspector Slack. The library was a scene of controlled chaos. Inspector Slack, a stocky man with a red face and a permanent scowl, stood near the hearth, barking orders to a young constable who was dusting for fingerprints. Dr. Haydock, a kindly man with a weary air, was packing his medical bag, having completed his examination. The body of Ruby Keene remained where it had been found, covered now with a sheet, though the outline of her form was unmistakable. The room's grandeur, its tall bookshelves, its leaded windows, seemed diminished by the grim presence. Miss Marple entered quietly, her footsteps soft on the rug. Slack glanced up, his scowl deepening. "And who's this?" he demanded, eyeing her as one might a stray cat. Dolly, at Miss Marple's side, bristled. "This is Miss Marple, a dear friend and someone with a remarkable head for these things. She's here to help," Slack snorted. "No offence, madam, but this is police work, not a knitting circle." He turned back to the constable, dismissing her. Miss Marple, unperturbed, smiled faintly. "Of course, Inspector, I wouldn't dream of interfering. But might I ask what you've learned about this poor girl?" Slack hesitated, then relented, perhaps sensing that ignoring her would be more trouble than answering. "Ruby Keene, 18, professional dancer at the Majestic. Strangled, likely between 10 and midnight. No signs of a struggle here, which means she was either killed elsewhere and brought in, or caught unawares. No one in the house admits to knowing her, and the Bantrys claim they were alone last night. No guests. No signs of entry?" Miss Marple asked, her tone mild. "None," Slack said curtly. "Doors locked, windows latched. Makes no sense, but we'll get to the bottom of it." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes drifting to the sheet-covered form. "May I see her, Dr. Haydock? Just a glance." Haydock, who respected Miss Marple's reputation, lifted the sheet briefly. The girl's face, even in death, was striking. Young, with sharp cheekbones and a painted beauty that spoke of ambition. The gaudy dress, the dyed hair, the marks on her throat, all told a story of a life cut short, perhaps by someone who resented its brightness. Miss Marple's gaze lingered, then flicked to the room. The undisturbed books, the heavy curtains, the faint scuff on the rug near the door. She said nothing, but her mind was already turning, sorting, discarding. As they left, "The library?" Dolly whispered. "What do you think, Jane?" Miss Marple adjusted her scarf, her expression serene, but her eyes alight with purpose. "I think, Dolly, that this girl was not meant to be here, yet here she is. That tells us something. I must visit the Majestic Hotel and learn who Ruby Keene was and who might have wished her gone." Outside, the village of St. Mary Mead hummed with whispers, the news of the body spreading like wildfire. Miss Marple, stepping into the waiting taxi, felt the weight of the puzzle settle upon her. It was a knot of human passions, greed, envy, fear, and she knew with quiet certainty that she would unravel it. Chapter 3. The Majestic Hotel. The road from St. Mary Mead to Danemouth wound through patchwork fields and low hills. The late morning sun burning away the last of the mist, Miss Jane Marple sat in the back of the taxi, her gloved hands folded neatly over her handbag, her eyes tracing the familiar landscape with a quiet alertness. The journey was short, but her mind was already far ahead, sifting through the fragments of the morning's discovery. A young dancer, Ruby Keene, strangled and inexplicably placed in the library of Gossington Hall. The incongruity of it, a girl of glitter and ambition in a setting of staid tradition, gnawed at her. There is a pattern, she murmured to herself, but it is not yet clear. The Majestic Hotel loomed into view as the taxi crested a rise, its white facade gleaming against the backdrop of the sea. It was a place of ostentatious elegance, its sprawling terraces and manicured gardens catering to the well-heeled and the aspirational alike. Miss Marple had visited it once, years ago, for a charity gala, and she recalled its air of restless glamour. The clink of champagne glasses, the rustle of silk, the undercurrents of envy and intrigue that swirled beneath the polished surface. It was, she thought, the perfect stage for a girl like Ruby Keene, and perhaps for her killer. The taxi deposited her at the hotel's grand entrance, where a uniformed porter, all brass buttons and practised deference, ushered her into the lobby. The space was a study in opulence. Marble floors, chandeliers dripping with crystal, and a sweeping staircase that seemed designed for grand entrances. Holidaymakers milled about, retired colonels in blazers, young couples on honeymoons, and a smattering of the fashionable set, their laughter bright but brittle. Miss Marple, in her sensible tweed and unadorned hat, blended into the background, as effortlessly as a sparrow among peacocks. She preferred it that way. Invisibility, she had long ago learned, was a powerful tool. At the reception desk, she requested an audience with the hotel manager, Mr. Prescott, presenting herself as a friend of Mrs. Bantry's with an interest in the recent tragedy. The clerk, a young man with slicked-back hair and a nervous smile, hesitated only a moment before fetching his superior. Mr. Prescott emerged from a side office, a portly man in his 50s with a bald head and a manner that balanced servility with self-importance. "Miss Marple, is it?" he said, shaking her hand with a touch too much vigour. "A dreadful business, this affair with Miss Keene. How may I assist you?" Miss Marple smiled, her expression mild, but her eyes sharp. "I am merely trying to understand the circumstances, Mr. Prescott. Mrs. Bantry is naturally distressed, and I thought a visit here might shed light on poor Miss Keene's life. Might we speak privately?" Mr. Prescott, sensing no threat in the elderly lady before him, led her to a small office behind the reception desk. The room was cluttered with ledgers and schedules, its single window offering a view of the hotel's service yard. He gestured to a chair, and Miss Marple settled into it, her handbag on her lap, her posture prim but attentive. "Ruby Keene was one of our professional dancers," Mr. Prescott began, folding his hands on the desk. "A charming girl, very popular with the guests. She performed in the ballroom most evenings, foxtrots, waltzes, that sort of thing. Her cousin, Josie Turner, is our lead dancer, and they worked together closely." Miss Marple nodded, her fingers brushing the clasp of her handbag. "And how did Ruby seem in the days before her death? Was she content, or was there anything unusual?" Mr. Prescott frowned, his brow creasing. "She was her usual self, I suppose. Lively, ambitious. Ruby had a way of drawing attention, you see. She was always chatting with guests, especially the wealthier ones. But there was a moment, perhaps 2 days ago, when she seemed distracted. I overheard her arguing with Josie in the corridor. Something about a foolish plan. I didn't catch the details, and I thought little of it at the time. Dancers can be temperamental." "An argument," Miss Marple repeated softly, her mind filing the detail away. "And last night? I understand she was meant to perform, but did not." Prescott's frown deepened. Yes, that was odd. Ruby was scheduled for the 10:30 performance, a special number with Josie. But she never appeared. Josie covered for her, of course, she's a professional, but I was annoyed. I assumed Ruby had slipped off with some guest. She was, well, let's say she enjoyed the company of gentlemen. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, though her expression remained serene. "Gentlemen, you say? Was there anyone in particular?" Mr. Prescott hesitated, then leaned forward, lowering his voice. "There was Mr. Mark Gaskell, a regular guest. A widower, quite well off, with a certain charm. He took a shine to Ruby, bought her trinkets, danced with her often. I saw them together several times this week, and Ruby seemed delighted. But there were others too. Mr. Conway Jefferson, an elderly gentleman, a bit of an invalid, took a paternal interest in her. He's a wealthy man, and Ruby was clever enough to keep his attention." Miss Marple's eyes flickered with interest, though her face betrayed nothing. "Mr. Jefferson, you say? And how did Mr. Gaskell react to this paternal interest, Mr.?" Prescott shrugged. "I couldn't say. Mark Gaskell is a sociable sort, but he keeps his cards close. If he was jealous, he didn't show it. As for Mr. Jefferson, he's a generous man, but his family, his sister-in-law, Mrs. Adelaide Jefferson, and her stepson, seemed less than pleased with Ruby's influence." Miss Marple nodded, her mind weaving connections. "I see. And Josie, Turner, how did she regard her cousin's popularity?" Mr. Prescott's expression tightened. "Josie's a hard worker, very reliable. She brought Ruby here, you know, got her the job. But I sensed some strain between them lately. Josie's older, less flashy, and Ruby's success might have stung. Still, they were family, and Josie seemed protective in her way." Miss Marple thanked him, her tone warm, but her thoughts already elsewhere. "You've been most helpful, Mr. Prescott. Might I observe the ballroom, perhaps speak with some of the staff?" Mr. Prescott, eager to return to his duties, arranged for a porter to escort her. The ballroom was a vast mirrored space, its chandeliers dimmed in the daylight, but still hinting at the splendour of evening. The parquet floor gleamed, and a small stage at one end held a piano and a few chairs for the orchestra. Miss Marple stood at the edge, imagining Ruby Keene twirling under the lights, her pink satin dress catching the glow, her laughter drawing every eye. But whose eyes, she wondered, had watched with malice? The porter introduced her to a waitress, Lily, a sharp-eyed girl in her 20s who had served the dancers' table the previous evening. Lily, flattered by Miss Marple's gentle questions, was eager to talk. "Ruby was in high spirits last night," she said, wiping a glass with a cloth. "She was at the bar around 9, sipping a lemonade and chatting with Mr. Gaskell. He was all smiles, but I heard him say something about making things right. Ruby just laughed, but it sounded forced, like she was nervous." Miss Marple tilted her head. "Nervous? Did she say anything else?" Lily thought for a moment. "Not much. She mentioned she had to meet someone later, but she didn't say who." Then Josie came over, looking cross, and told Ruby to get ready for their number. Ruby rolled her eyes and said, "Don't fuss. I know what I'm doing." That was the last I saw of her. Miss Marple thanked Lily, her mind turning to Josie Turner. A cousin, a protector, yet perhaps a rival. She asked the porter to point out Josie, who was rehearsing in a smaller studio off the ballroom. Miss Marple approached quietly, pausing at the door to observe. Josie was a woman of about 30, her dark hair pulled into a tight bun, her movements precise, but lacking the spark that must have defined Ruby. She was practicing a waltz, her partner a young man from the hotel staff, and her face was set in a mask of concentration. When the music paused, Miss Marple stepped forward, introducing herself as a friend of the Bantrys, investigating Ruby's death. Josie's eyes, dark and guarded, met hers. "I've already spoken to the police," she said, her voice clipped. "I don't know what else I can tell you." Miss Marple smiled, undeterred. "I'm sure it's been a terrible shock, Miss Turner. I only wish to understand Ruby better. She was your cousin, I believe." Josie nodded, her hands smoothing her practice skirt. "Yes, my mother's sister's. Girl, I brought her here last year, got her the dancing job. She was good, better than me in some ways. The guests loved her." There was a trace of bitterness in her tone, and Miss Marple noted it. "It must have been difficult, sharing the spotlight," she said gently. "Did you ever disagree?" Josie's lips tightened. "We had our moments. Ruby was headstrong, always chasing some big dream. She'd get caught up with men like Gaskell, thinking they'd make her a star. I told her to be careful, but she didn't listen. And last night," Miss Marple pressed, her voice soft but insistent. "When did you last see her?" Josie hesitated, her eyes flickering to the side. "Around 9, at the bar. I told her to get ready for our number, but she said she had something to do first. When she didn't show up at 10:30, I assumed she'd run off with Gaskell or someone. It wasn't the first time she'd been unreliable." Miss Marple nodded, her expression sympathetic but her mind alert. Josie's composure was remarkable, almost too perfect. "You must feel her loss keenly," she said. "Family is so precious." Josie's face softened, but only for a moment. "She was all I had," she said quietly, then turned back to her partner, signalling the end of the conversation. Miss Marple left the studio, her thoughts a tangle of impressions. Josie's grief seemed genuine, yet there was a hardness in her, a calculation that belied her role as the protective cousin. Mark Gaskell, with his charm and his gifts, was another piece of the puzzle, as was Conway Jefferson, the wealthy invalid whose interest in Ruby had stirred familial tensions. And then there was the argument Mr. Prescott had overheard, the foolish plan that Ruby and Josie had clashed over. It was, Miss Marple thought, like a village quarrel writ large. Ambition, envy, and secrets, all simmering beneath the surface. She paused at the ballroom's entrance, glancing back at the mirrored, Walls. The Majestic was a world of appearances, where truth was masked by smiles and flattery. Ruby Keene had danced here, her youth and beauty a currency that had bought her attention, and perhaps her death. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly, her mind conjuring an image from her own village. Young Ellen, who had flirted with the wrong man and paid a price, though not so steep as this. People are the same everywhere, she murmured, adjusting her hat, and so are their sins. As she stepped into the lobby, intending to seek out Mark Gaskell or Conway Jefferson, a commotion at the reception desk caught her attention. A young man, dishevelled and agitated, was arguing with the clerk. "I need to see the manager," he insisted, his voice carrying. "It's about Ruby Keene. She was my friend, and I know something." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained serene. She moved closer, her small figure unnoticed in the bustle. The young man, she learned, was George Bartlett, a guest at the hotel and one of Ruby's admirers. His words, overheard by Miss Marple's sharp ears, hinted at a meeting Ruby had planned the previous night, one she had kept secret even from Josie. "She said it was important," Bartlett told the clerk, "but she wouldn't tell me who it was with." Miss Marple filed this away, her mind racing. A secret meeting? A missed performance? A body in a library miles away? The pieces were scattered, but they were beginning to form a shape. She resolved to speak with Bartlett later, but first she would find Mark Gaskell. If Ruby had been entangled with him, he might hold the key to her final hours. As she made her way to the terrace where Gaskell was said to be taking tea, the sea sparkled beyond the hotel, its surface calm but hiding depths unknown. Miss Marple, her handbag swinging gently, felt a familiar thrill. The Majestic Hotel was a stage, and she was determined to unmask its players before the curtain fell. Chapter 4. The Shadow of Basil Blake. The afternoon sun slanted across the tidy lanes of St. Mary Mead, gilding the thatched roofs and casting long shadows that seemed to whisper of secrets. Miss Jane Marple, back from her illuminating visit to the Majestic Hotel, sat in the drawing-room of Gossington Hall, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she listened to Dolly Bantry's latest report. The village was abuzz with the murder of Ruby Keene, and the gossip, like a river in spate, had begun to swirl around a familiar figure. Basil Blake, the young film technician whose modern ways and rakish reputation made him a lightning rod for suspicion. "He's always been trouble," Dolly said, her hands fluttering as she poured tea. "Those parties of his, Jane, music blaring till all hours, girls in scandalous dresses, bottles everywhere, and that Dinah Lee, his so-called fiancée, with her peroxided hair and her London airs. The village has never taken to them, and now they're saying Basil was seen near the hall the night Ruby was killed. Can you imagine?" Miss Marple's needles paused, her mild blue eyes lifting to meet Dolly's. "What exactly are they saying, my dear?" Her voice was soft, almost absent, but there was a steel beneath it, a quiet insistence that cut through the chatter. Dolly leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Mrs. Price, from the post office, swears she saw Basil's car, a flashy red thing, parked on the lane behind the hall around 10 o'clock. And Mr. Stubbs, the butcher, says he heard an engine revving near midnight, just past Basil's cottage. Of course, no one's surprised. Everyone knows Basil's mixed up with those show business types. And Ruby was a dancer, wasn't she? There, saying he knew her. Maybe even... well, you know. Miss Marple resumed her knitting, the soft clack of the needles a counterpoint to her thoughts. "Gossip is a dangerous thing, Dolly," she said. "It's like a snowball. Starts small, but it gathers all sorts of nonsense as it rolls. Still, if Basil Blake was near the Hall, that's worth knowing. I think I shall pay him a visit." Dolly's eyes widened. "You, Jane, to that cottage? It's hardly proper, with his reputation." Miss Marple smiled, a faint amused curve of her lips. "My dear, I've faced worse than a young man with loud music and a fast car. Besides, propriety is a poor shield against murder." She set her knitting aside, her decision made. "But first, tell me what the police are doing. Has Inspector Slack spoken to Basil yet?" Dolly nodded, her expression sour. "Oh, yes. Slack stormed over to Basil's cottage this morning, all red-faced and shouting." Mary overheard him telling Arthur that Basil was evasive, claimed he was at a party in Danemouth till late, but Dinah Lee let slip something about Basil arguing with a girl a few days ago. Someone blonde, like Ruby. Slack's convinced Basil's hiding something, and I can't say I blame him. Miss Marple's fingers brushed the edge of her teacup, her mind turning over the new information. An argument, a car near the Hall, a young man with a reputation for recklessness. It was a tempting narrative. But she had learned long ago to distrust the obvious. "I shall see for myself," she said, rising with a spryness that belied her years. "If you'll lend me your car, Dolly, I'll be back before dinner." The drive to Basil Blake's cottage was short, a mere half-mile along a winding lane bordered by hawthorn hedges. The cottage itself was a low, modern affair, its whitewashed walls and flat roof an affront to the village's Tudor charm. A red sports car, waxed to a gleam, sat in the drive, and from within came the faint thump of a gramophone, playing something jazzy and discordant. Miss Marple stepped out of the Bantry's sedate Morris, her black handbag dangling from her arm, and approached the door with the air of a vicar's wife calling on a parishioner. The door swung open before she could knock, revealing Dinah Lee in a silk dressing gown, her platinum hair tousled, a cigarette dangling from her fingers. She was perhaps 25, with sharp features and a defiant tilt to her chin, but her eyes were wary, shadowed with something like fear. "Who are you?" she asked, her London accent cutting through the country quiet. Miss Marple smiled, undaunted. "My name is Jane Marple, a friend of Mrs. Bantry's. I was hoping to speak with Mr. Blake about the unfortunate events at Gossington Hall. May I come in?" Dinah hesitated, then shrugged, stepping aside. "Suit yourself. Basil's in a mood, though. The police have been at him all morning." She led Miss Marple into a cluttered sitting room, where empty glasses and ashtrays littered the tables, and a garish abstract painting dominated one wall. Basil Blake lounged on a sofa, a glass of whisky in his hand, his dark hair dishevelled, and his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He was handsome in a sullen, boyish way, but his eyes were bloodshot, and his mouth twisted with irritation. "What's this, then?" he said, sitting up. "Another busybody from the village? I've told the police everything I know, which is nothing." Miss Marple settled into an armchair, her posture prim, but her gaze unwavering. "I'm sure you have, Mr. Blake," she said, her voice gentle but firm. But I'm not the police, and I'm not here to accuse you. I only wish to understand what happened to Ruby Keene. You knew her, I believe?" Basil's eyes narrowed, and he exchanged a quick glance with Dinah, who had perched on the arm of the sofa. "Knew her? Barely. Met her a couple of times at the Majestic, that's all. She was a dancer, hung around with the hotel crowd. Not my type." Dinah snorted, flicking ash from her cigarette. "Don't play the saint, Basil. You danced with her last week, and you were arguing with her outside the bar. I saw you." Basil's face reddened, and he slammed his glass down on the table. "For God's sake, Dinah, it wasn't an argument. She was pestering me about some film contact in London. Thought I could get her an audition. I told her I wasn't in that game anymore. That's it." Miss Marple's eyes flickered with interest, though her expression remained serene. "When was this, Mr. Blake? And what exactly did she say?" Basil ran a hand through his hair, his agitation palpable. "I don't know. Wednesday, maybe. She cornered me after her dance number, all smiles and flattery, saying she'd heard I knew people in the studios. I told her I'd left that life, and she got pushy, said she'd make it worth my while. I laughed it off, told her to find someone else to bother. End of story." Miss Marple nodded, her fingers brushing the clasp of her handbag. "And last night, the police seemed to think you were near Gossington Hall." Basil's jaw tightened, and he leaned forward, his voice low. "I was at a party in Danemouth, like I told that oaf Slack. Left around 11, drove home, went to bed. Yes, I passed near the hall. It's on the bloody road to my cottage. But I didn't stop, and I didn't see anything. You think I'd drag a dead girl into the Bantry's library? I'm not that stupid." Dinah's eyes darted to Basil, and Miss Marple caught the flicker of doubt in her expression. "You were late getting back," Dinah said, her voice sharp. "I was asleep when you came in, and it was past midnight. Where were you?" Basil shot her a glare. "I stopped for a smoke, all right. Pulled over by the quarry, cleared my head. I wasn't sneaking around murdering anyone." Miss Marple's mind was racing, sorting through the threads of Basil's story. His defensiveness, Dinah's suspicion, the timing of his drive. It all painted a picture, but not the one the village gossip was eager to embrace. She thought of young Tom, the gardener's son in St. Mary Mead, who had once been blamed for a theft because he was that sort of boy. The truth, she had found, was often less convenient than the narrative. "Thank you, Mr. Blake," she said, rising. "You've been most helpful. I won't take up more of your time." As she turned to leave, Dinah followed her to the door, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He's not a bad sort, really," she said, "but he's been jumpy lately, ever since that row with Ruby. I don't think he hurt her, but he's not telling the whole truth." Miss Marple met her gaze, her eyes kind but piercing. "The truth has a way of coming out, Miss Lee. Thank you for your candour." She stepped into the fading light, the gramophone's wail fading behind her, and climbed into the waiting car. Back at Gossington Hall, she found Colonel Bantry in the study, his face etched with worry. "Slack's been here again," he said, pouring himself a brandy. "He's got it into his head that Basil's our man. Says he's got no proper alibi and a history of trouble. What did you make of him, Jane?" Miss Marple settled into a chair, her handbag on her lap. "Basil Blake is frightened," she said, her voice thoughtful. "And he's hiding something. But I don't believe it's murder. He's too obvious, Arthur. A killer would be cleverer, more careful, but his presence near the hall is troubling, and we mustn't dismiss it." She paused, her mind returning to the majestic hotel, to the web of relationships surrounding Ruby Keene. Mark Gaskell, with his charm and his gifts. Josie Turner, with her guarded grief. Conway Jefferson, whose wealth had drawn Ruby's ambition. And now Basil Blake, a peripheral figure whose proximity to the crime made him a convenient scapegoat. "There is a pattern," she said softly, almost to herself. "But it's like a tapestry. Pull one thread, and the whole design shifts." Colonel Bantry grunted, unconvinced. "All I know is this business is a damned nuisance. The sooner Slacklock someone up, the better." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her eyes distant. "The truth is rarely so accommodating, Arthur. But I shall find it, or it will find me." She rose, her small figure resolute, and excused herself to prepare for dinner. As she climbed the stairs, her thoughts were already spinning forward, to the majestic, to Basil's evasions, to the quiet malice that had brought a young girl's body to Gossington Hall. The village of St. Mary Mead might sleep, but Jane Marple was wide awake, and the shadow of Basil Blake was only the beginning. Chapter 5. A Question of Motive. The late afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Gossington Hall, casting a golden haze over the drawing-room where Miss Jane Marple sat with Dolly Bantry. The air was heavy with the scent of roses, from a vase on the sideboard, but the tranquillity of the scene was undercut by the shadow of murder. Miss Marple's knitting lay untouched in her lap, her hands folded over her black handbag, as she listened to Dolly's anxious recounting of the village's latest whispers. The death of Ruby Keene, so brutally out of place in the library, had stirred St. Mary Mead into a frenzy of speculation, and Miss Marple, with her quiet acuity, was piecing together the fragments of truth beneath the noise. "I can't bear it, Jane," Dolly said, pacing before the fireplace. "Everyone's talking. Mrs. Price at the post office, the vicar's wife, even the milkman. They're convinced Basil Blake had something to do with it. But now there's talk about that man at the Majestic, Mark Gaskell. They say he was sweet on Ruby, and you know how jealousy can turn people. Oh, it's all so sordid." Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, followed Dolly's restless movements. "Jealousy is a powerful force, Dolly," she said, her voice soft but measured. "But it's often a mask for something colder, greed perhaps, or fear. I've been thinking about what I learned at the Majestic yesterday, and I believe we must look beyond the obvious passions to find the heart of this crime." Dolly paused, her hands twisting together. "You mean money? But Ruby was just a dancer, Jane. What could she have that anyone would kill for?" Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint, thoughtful smile. "Not what she had, my dear, but what she might have gained, or what someone else stood to lose. I must return to the Majestic today. There are threads there. Mark Gaskell, Conway Jefferson, Josie Turner, that need untangling. Will you come with me? Your presence might smooth the way." Dolly hesitated, then nodded, her practical nature reasserting itself. "Of course, Jane. Anything to get to the bottom of this. But I warn you, that hotel is a nest of vipers. Everyone's smiling, but you can feel the claws beneath." Miss Marple rose, adjusting her hat with a deft touch. "Vipers are predictable, Dolly, once you know their habits. Shall we go?" The drive to Danemouth was swift, the autumn countryside rolling past in a blur of russet and gold, the majestic hotel, with its gleaming facade and air of manufactured grandeur, welcomed them as it had the day before. But Miss Marple's purpose was sharper now, her questions honed by the revelations of Basil Blake's evasiveness and the tensions she had sensed among Ruby's circle. As they entered the lobby, the hum of conversation and the clink of teacups greeted them, but Miss Marple's attention was drawn to a figure at the far end of the room, Mark Gaskell, leaning against a pillar, his dark suit impeccable, his smile easy, but his eyes restless. "There's our man," Dolly whispered, nudging Miss Marple. "He looks like he hasn't a care in the world, but I don't trust him." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene, but her mind alert. "Let us observe him first, Dolly. A man like Mr. Gaskell reveals himself in small ways," they settled, at a table on the terrace where afternoon tea was being served to a scattering of guests. The sea sparkled beyond the balustrade, its calm surface belying the currents beneath. A fitting metaphor, Miss Marple thought, for the hotel itself. She ordered tea, her eyes drifting to Gaskell, who had joined a group of guests at a nearby table. He was in his early 40s, handsome in a polished, slightly worn way, with a quick laugh and a knack for making those around him feel important. But there was a hardness in his jaw, a flicker of calculation in his gaze that Miss Marple noted with interest. As the waitress poured their tea, Miss Marple leaned toward Dolly. "Tell me, Dolly, what do you know of Conway Jefferson? Mr. Prescott mentioned him yesterday, a wealthy man, an invalid who took an interest in Ruby." Dolly's brows rose. "Conway Jefferson? I've heard of him, of course. Old money, made a fortune in shipping or some such. Lost his wife and children in an accident years ago, left him crippled. He stays at the Majestic every autumn, I believe, with his sister-in-law, Adelaide Jefferson. Why, do you think he's involved?" Miss Marple's fingers brushed the handle of her teacup. Not involved, perhaps, but significant. Ruby was close to him, and where there is wealth, there is motive. I must speak with him, and with Mrs. Jefferson. But first, let us see if we can learn more about Mr. Gaskell. Their opportunity came sooner than expected. As the tea service concluded, Gaskell excused himself from his group and strolled toward the terrace railing, lighting a cigarette. Miss Marple, seizing the moment, rose and approached him, Dolly trailing behind. "Mr. Gaskell," she said, her voice gentle but clear. "I am Jane Marple, a friend of Mrs. Bantry's. Might I have a word?" Gaskell turned, his smile automatic, but his eyes wary. "Of course, Miss Marple. Mrs. Bantry, you say? A charming woman. How can I help you?" His tone was smooth, but there was a guardedness in his posture, a subtle tensing of his shoulders. Miss Marple smiled, her demeanour that of a harmless old lady. "It's about poor Ruby Keene. I understand you knew her well. I'm trying to piece together her final days for Mrs. Bantry's sake. Such a shocking thing, her death." Gaskell's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly. "Shocking, yes. Ruby was a delightful girl, full of life, terribly talented. We danced a few times, chatted over drinks. She had big dreams, you know, wanted to be a film star. I tried to tell her it's a tough world, but she was determined." Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes soft but piercing. "You were fond of her, then? I heard you gave her gifts, a bracelet, perhaps, or a locket." Gaskell's fingers tightened on his cigarette, and he exhaled a plume of smoke. Gifts. Oh, nothing serious. A trinket or two, the sort of thing you give a pretty girl who makes you laugh. Ruby was good company, but it was all in fun. I'm a widower, Miss Marple, not a fool. Dolly, unable to resist, interjected. But people saw you with her often, Mr. Gaskell. Some say you were smitten. And there's talk of jealousy, perhaps, over her friendship with Mr. Jefferson. Gaskell's laugh was sharp, almost bitter. Jealousy? Nonsense. Conway's an old man, practically a father to her. He liked her spirit, that's all. As for me, I enjoyed her company. But I wasn't about to propose. If you're looking for motives, you'd do better to ask Josie Turner. She and Ruby were thick as thieves. But cousins can quarrel, can't they? Miss Marple noted the deflection, her mind filing away his mention of Josie. Indeed they can, she said. When did you last see Ruby, Mr. Gaskell? The night she died, perhaps. Gaskell hesitated, his eyes flicking to the sea. That night. Let me think. I saw her at the bar, around 9. She was in high spirits, said she had a meeting later. I didn't ask with whom, none of my business. I danced with a few other guests, then turned in around 11. Next thing I knew, she was gone. Miss Marple nodded, her expression sympathetic, but her thoughts racing. A meeting, just as George Bartlett had mentioned. Thank you, Mr. Gaskell. You've been most kind. She turned away, Dolly at her side, and they returned to their table, where Miss Marple's tea had grown cold. He's slippery, Dolly muttered. All charm and no substance. Did you believe him? Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. Partially. He was fond of Ruby, but not in love. There's something else driving him. Money, perhaps, or a need to protect his position. We must learn more about his connection to Conway Jefferson. Their next target was Adelaide Jefferson, whom they found in the hotel's reading room. A quiet space lined with bookshelves and soft armchairs. Adelaide was a woman in her late 30s, her auburn hair neatly coiled, her tailored dress speaking of understated wealth. She was reading a novel, but her eyes were distant, and when Miss Marple introduced herself, she set the book aside with a polite but weary smile. I've heard of the tragedy, Adelaide said, her voice low and cultured. It's dreadful, of course, but I barely knew the girl. Conway was fond of her, though, said she reminded him of his daughter Rosamond. He's terribly shaken. Miss Marple settled into a chair opposite, her handbag on her lap. Mr. Jefferson's fondness must have been a comfort to Ruby, she said. I understand he spent a great deal of time with her. Did that ever cause tension, perhaps, within the family? Adelaide's fingers tightened on the armrest, but her face remained composed. Tension? Not really. Conway's generous, and Ruby was a bright little thing. I suppose I worried she might take advantage, but he's not a fool. He knew she was after something, attention, security, perhaps a leg up in her career. But he enjoyed her company, and I didn't begrudge him that. Dolly, less tactful, leaned forward. But what about Mark Gaskell? He's part of your family, isn't he? People say he was jealous of Ruby's influence over Mr. Jefferson. Adelaide's smile was thin. Mark is my late husband's brother-in-law, yes. He's charming, but restless. If he was jealous, it wasn't my concern. He and Ruby were friendly, but I doubt it was serious. Mark's too practical for that. Miss Marple's eyes flickered with interest. Practical, a word that echoed her own thoughts about Gaskell. "And the night Ruby died?" she asked. "Were you all here at the hotel?" Adelaide nodded. "I was in the ballroom until 10. Then I went to Conway's suite to read to him. He tires easily, you see. Mark was about, dancing or drinking, I suppose. I didn't see Ruby after dinner." Miss Marple thanked her, her mind turning over Adelaide's calm demeanour. There was a reserve in her, a careful distance that suggested she knew more than she said. As they left the reading room, Miss Marple murmured to Dolly, "Mrs. Jefferson is protecting someone. Conway, perhaps, or even Mark. But why?" Their final stop was Conway Jefferson himself, whom they found in a private suite overlooking the sea. He was a man in his 60s, his once robust frame diminished by injury, his face lined with grief and resolve. A wheelchair stood by the window, and a nurse hovered discreetly in the background. Conway greeted them with a weary courtesy, his voice strong despite his frailty. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry," he said, gesturing to chairs. "I've heard of your interest in Ruby's death. She was a dear girl, a light in this dreary world. I can't imagine who would harm her." Miss Marple's voice was gentle, almost maternal. "She must have been a comfort to you, Mr. Jefferson. I understand you planned to help her, perhaps financially." Conway's eyes sharpened, but he nodded. "I was fond of her, yes. She had spirit, ambition. I thought of making her my ward, perhaps leaving her a small legacy. Nothing was settled, but I wanted to give her a chance." Dolly's eyes widened, but Miss Marple remained composed. "A generous gesture," she said. "Did anyone object to it? Your family, perhaps?" Conway's jaw tightened. Adelaide was cautious, but she understood. Mark's always been a bit of a gambler, financially and otherwise. He might have worried about his own share, but I made it clear my plans wouldn't change drastically. Ruby wasn't a threat to anyone. Miss Marple's mind raced, the pieces shifting into a new configuration. A legacy, however small, was a motive, especially for a man like Mark Gaskell, whose practical nature might extend to desperate measures. "When did you last see Ruby?" she asked. "The evening she died," Conway said, his voice heavy. "She came to my suite around 8, chatted for a bit. She seemed excited, said she had a plan to make her mark. I thought she meant her dancing. She left around 9, and that was the last I saw of her." Miss Marple thanked him, her heart heavy with the weight of his grief. As they left the suite, Dolly whispered, "A legacy, Jane. That's it, isn't it? Someone wanted to stop Ruby from getting that money." Miss Marple's eyes were distant, her thoughts weaving a tapestry of greed and betrayal. "Perhaps, Dolly, but it's not just the money. It's the fear of losing it, the resentment of Ruby's place in Conway's heart. Mark Gaskell, Josie, Turner, even Adelaide, they all have reasons to resent her, but only one had the coldness to act." As they drove back to St. Mary Mead, the sun sinking behind the hills, Miss Marple's mind was alight with possibilities. Ruby Keane's death was no crime of passion, she was certain, but a calculated act, born of a motive as old as humanity itself. "Money is always a motive," she said softly, echoing her earlier thought. "But so is control." And in that moment she knew the key lay not in Ruby's life, but in the shadows cast by those who stood to lose the most. Chapter 6. The Alibi. Unravels. The evening shadows lengthened over St. Mary Mead, softening the edges of the village's thatched cottages and lending an air of deceptive calm to the turmoil that had gripped it since Ruby Keene's body was found in Gossington Hall's library. Miss Jane Marple sat in her modest sitting room at the Hall, a guest for the night at Dolly Bantry's insistence. A single lamp cast a warm glow over her, illuminating the delicate lace of her shawl and the sharp intelligence in her eyes. Her knitting lay abandoned on the table, for her mind was too restless for such gentle work. The threads of the case, Mark Gaskell's guarded charm, Josie Turner's calculated grief, Conway Jefferson's generous intentions, and Basil Blake's suspicious proximity were weaving into a pattern, but it was still obscured, like a tapestry, viewed in half-light. Dolly burst into the room, her face flushed with the excitement of fresh news. "Jane, you'll never guess what's happened. Inspector Slack's been to Basil Blake's cottage again, and his alibi's fallen to pieces. Mrs. Price just told me. Oh, I know it's gossip, but it's too good not to share. They're saying Basil's as good as caught." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, her expression one of patient indulgence. "Calm yourself, Dolly, and tell me exactly what you've heard. Gossip is like a cracked mirror. It distorts, but there's often a shard of truth in it." Dolly sank into a chair, her hands fluttering. "Well, Slack sent a constable to Danemouth to check Basil's story about that party he claims he was at. You know, the one he said kept him out till 11. The waiter at the club, some place called the Blue Parrot, swears Basil left by 10, maybe earlier. He was seen getting into that red car of his, and no one knows where he went after that. It's enough time to get to Gossington Hall, Jane, and back again. Slack's furious, says Basil's been lying through his teeth." Miss Marple's fingers brushed the arm of her chair, her mind turning over the new information. 10 o'clock, you say? Interesting. And what does Mr. Blake say to this? Dolly leaned forward, her voice dropping. "He's sticking to his story, but he's crumbling, Jane." Mary overheard Slack talking to Arthur. Basil admitted he drove past the Hall, but he swears he didn't stop. Claims he pulled over by the quarry for a cigarette, like he told you, but Slack doesn't believe a word of it. And Dinah Lee's not helping. She's saying Basil was acting strange when he got home, all jumpy and short-tempered. Oh, Jane, do you think he did it? Miss Marple's eyes were distant, her thoughts racing. Basil Blake is frightened, Dolly, and fear makes a man clumsy. But fear doesn't always mean guilt. I must speak with him again, and soon. But first, there's another matter I must pursue at the Majestic. Conway Jefferson's intentions toward Ruby are the key. I'm certain of it. Will you arrange for the car tomorrow morning? Dolly nodded, her curiosity piqued. Of course, but what's Conway got to do with Basil's alibi? You're not saying they're connected, are you? Miss Marple smiled faintly, a glimmer of amusement in her eyes. Everything is connected, my dear, if you look deeply enough. Now, let's have some tea and think no more of it tonight. A clear mind is the best weapon against confusion. But sleep did not come easily to Miss Marple that night. Her room at Gossington Hall was comfortable, its chintz curtains and mahogany furniture a testament to Dolly's hospitality. But her thoughts were elsewhere, darting between the glittering ballroom of the Majestic and the shadowed lanes of St. Aid. Mary Mead. Basil Blake's broken alibi was a significant thread, but it was Conway Jefferson's revelation that he had considered making Ruby his ward that tugged most insistently at her mind. Such a decision, however informal, would have sent ripples through his circle, stirring resentment, fear, or desperation. And desperation, she knew, could turn even the most polished hand to murder. The next morning, after a breakfast of toast and marmalade, Miss Marple and Dolly set out for Danemouth. The majestic hotel greeted them with its usual bustle, the lobby alive with guests planning their day. Tennis on the courts, a drive along the coast, or a lazy morning by the pool. Miss Marple, in her familiar tweed coat and sensible hat, moved through the crowd with the unobtrusive grace of a shadow, her eyes missing nothing. Dolly, at her side, was less composed, her glances darting to every well-dressed guest, as if expecting a murderer to leap out. Their first stop was Conway Jefferson's suite, where they found the old man in his wheelchair by the window, a blanket draped over his knees. His face, lined with the weight of loss, brightened slightly at their arrival, though his eyes held a lingering sorrow. The nurse, a quiet woman with a competent air, withdrew to a corner, leaving them to speak. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry," Conway said, his voice strong despite his frailty. "I'm glad you've come. This business with Ruby, it's torn me apart. She was so young, so full of promise. I keep asking myself what I could have done to save her." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her handbag on her lap, her expression one of gentle sympathy. "You mustn't blame yourself, Mr. Jefferson, but your kindness to Ruby may help us find her killer. You mentioned yesterday that you considered making her your ward. Had you discussed this with anyone? Your family, perhaps, or Ruby herself?" Conway's hands tightened on the arms of his wheelchair, and his gaze drifted to the sea beyond the window. "I spoke of it to Ruby, yes, a few days ago. She was thrilled, poor girl. Saw it as a chance to escape her life, to study perhaps or train properly for the stage. I hadn't finalized anything, but I was serious. As for my family, I mentioned it to Adelaide, and she was cautious, as always. She worried Ruby might be mercenary, but she didn't object outright. Mark was less pleased." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her voice remained soft. "Mr. Gaskell, you mean? Did he say why?" Conway sighed, his shoulders sagging. "Mark's always been a bit of a drifter, charming, but reckless with money. He relies on me, you see, more than he'd admit. When I told him about Ruby, he laughed it off, said she was a gold digger who'd bleed me dry. But I could see he was rattled. He's got debts, Miss Marple, and he's counting on my estate to clear them. Ruby's arrival threatened that, or so he thought." Dolly, unable to contain herself, leaned forward. "Threatened it enough to kill her, do you think?" Conway's face darkened, and he shook his head. "I don't want to believe it, Mrs. Bantry. Mark's no saint, but murder? It's too monstrous. Still, he was here that night in the hotel, and I don't know what he was doing after 10. Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing away the confirmation of Mark's motive. And Ruby herself, did she mention anyone who might have resented her or any plans she had for that evening? Conway's brow furrowed. She was vague, said she was meeting someone after her dance number, someone who could help her career. I assumed it was a guest, perhaps someone with connections. She was so excited, Miss Marple, so sure her life was about to change. And now... His voice broke, and he turned away, his hands trembling. Miss Marple rose, her touch light on his arm. "Thank you, Mr. Jefferson. You've given us much to consider. We'll do all we can to find the truth." As they left the suite, Dolly's eyes were wide with indignation. "Mark Gaskell," she whispered. "He had every reason to want Ruby gone. Debts, jealousy, the lot. And he was here, Jane, when she disappeared. It's him, isn't it?" Miss Marple's expression was thoughtful, her eyes distant. "Perhaps, Dolly, but motives are like pebbles in a stream. There are always more beneath the surface. We must speak to Josie Turner again, and I'd like to find young George Bartlett. His mention of Ruby's secret meeting is troubling. They found Josie in the ballroom, overseeing a rehearsal for the evening's performance. She was dressed in a simple black frock, her dark hair pulled back, her movements brisk but her face drawn. When Miss Marple approached, Josie's eyes flickered with a mix of irritation and resignation. "I've told the police everything," she said, her voice sharp. "I don't know what more you want, Miss Marple." Miss Marple smiled, undeterred. "Just a moment of your time, Miss Turner. I understand Ruby was to perform with you the night she died, but she didn't appear. Did she tell you where she was going?" Josie's hands stilled, and she glanced at the dancers on the stage, as if seeking an escape. "She said she had to see someone, that's all. I told her not to be late, but Ruby was always chasing some dream. When she didn't show, I assumed she'd gone off with Gaskell or that Bartlett boy. She was like that, impulsive." Miss Marple's eyes were gentle but piercing. "And you weren't concerned when she didn't return?" Josie's lips tightened. "Of course I was, but I had a show to run. I couldn't chase after her. By the time I realized she was really gone, it was too late." Her voice cracked, and she turned away, her shoulders stiff. Miss Marple noted the strain in her, the flicker of something unspoken. "You were close to her, weren't you? It must be painful, losing her so suddenly." Josie's eyes met hers, and for a moment the mask slipped, revealing raw grief. "She was family," she said softly. "But she was reckless, always pushing, too far. I tried to protect her, but—" She stopped, her jaw tightening, and resumed her work, dismissing them with a nod. As they left the ballroom, Dolly whispered, "She's hiding something, Jane. Did you see how she clammed up?" Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts racing. "Josie knows more than she's saying. But whether it's guilt or fear, I can't yet tell. Let's find Mr. Bartlett." George Bartlett proved elusive, but a helpful porter directed them to the hotel's billiard room, where the young man was knocking balls about with a distracted air. He was in his early 20s, with a boyish face and a nervous energy that made him seem younger. When Miss Marple introduced herself, he dropped his cue, his eyes wide. "You're here about Ruby? I told the police what I know, but they didn't. Listen, she was my friend, Miss Marple, and I'm sure she was in trouble that night." Miss Marple settled onto a bench, her handbag on her lap. "Tell me, Mr. Bartlett, you mentioned a meeting Ruby had planned. What exactly did she say?" Bartlett ran a hand through his hair, his voice earnest. "It was at dinner, about 8. She was sitting with me all bubbly, saying she'd got a chance to make something of herself. Said she was meeting someone after her dance, someone important. I asked who, but she just laughed and said I'd read about it in the papers one day. I thought she was joking, but she looked, I don't know, excited but scared." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. "Scared, you say? Did she mention anyone else? Mr. Gaskell, perhaps, or Mr. Jefferson? Bartlett shook his head. Not by name. But she did say something odd. Said she had to be careful, because some people don't like being crossed. I didn't know what she meant, but it stuck with me. Miss Marple thanked him, her mind alight with possibilities. A secret meeting, a hint of danger, a motive tied to Conway Jefferson's wealth. It was all coming together, but the final piece was still missing. As they drove back to St. Mary Mead, the countryside cloaked in twilight, she turned to Dolly. Basil Blake's alibi is broken, but he's not our killer, she said, her voice firm. He's a pawn, caught up in something larger. The real crime lies at the Majestic, with someone who saw Ruby as a threat, not to their heart, but to their future. Mark Gaskell, Josie Turner, perhaps even Adelaide, they're all part of it, but I suspect there's more than one hand at work. Dolly's eyes widened. More than one? You mean a conspiracy? Miss Marple's smile was faint, almost wistful. Human nature is rarely solitary, Dolly. Greed, fear, love, they bind people together, even in crime. We're close, my dear, but we must be patient. The truth will show itself, as it always does. As Gossington Hall came into view, its windows glowing against the dusk, Miss Marple felt a quiet certainty settle over her. The alibi's unravelling was a step, but the heart of the mystery lay in the tangled motives of those Ruby Keene had left behind. And she, Jane Marple, would not rest until every thread was laid bare. Chapter 7. The Second Body. The quiet of St. Mary Mead was shattered anew as dawn broke over the village, its rosy light marred by the wail of police sirens echoing from the road to Danemouth. Miss Jane Marple, roused from a light sleep in her guest room at Gossington Hall, peered through the curtains to see a police car speeding past. Its urgency a stark contrast to the village's usual calm. Her instincts, honed by years of unravelling human folly, told her this was no ordinary call. Dressing swiftly in her tweed skirt and cardigan, she descended to the drawing-room, where Dolly Bantry was already pacing, her face pale with fresh alarm. "Jane, it's dreadful!" Dolly exclaimed, wringing her hands. "Arthur just had a call from Superintendent Harper. There's been another death. A car wreck near Danemouth burned to a cinder, and they think it's a young girl. The Dow police are in a state, saying it might be connected to Ruby Keene. Oh, what is happening to our quiet little world?" Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, narrowed slightly. "Another girl," she murmured, her voice steady but laced with a quiet intensity. "This changes everything, Dolly. We must go to Danemouth at once. If there's a link to Ruby, we cannot afford to wait." Dolly, though shaken, nodded, her practical nature asserting itself. "I'll have the car brought round. But Jane, do you think it's the same killer? 2 murders in a week. It's unthinkable." Sandal, Marple adjusted her hat, her expression serene but her mind racing. Unthinkable, perhaps, but not impossible. Murder, like any sin, has a way of breeding more. Let us see what the police have found. The drive to Danemouth was tense, the countryside blurring past as Miss Marple's thoughts turned inward. Ruby Keene's death had been a calculated act, she was certain, driven by motives rooted in Conway Jefferson's wealth and the resentments it had stirred. Basil Blake's broken alibi, Mark Gaskell's guarded charm, Josie Turner's strained grief, and Adelaide Jefferson's careful reserve. All pointed to a web of deceit at the Majestic Hotel. But a second death so soon suggested either, desperate cover-up or a deeper design. 2 bodies, she whispered to herself, and 1 truth. They arrived at the outskirts of Danemouth, where a narrow road branched off toward a quarry. A cordon of police cars and a small crowd of onlookers marked the site of the wreck. The air was acrid with the smell of charred metal and petrol, and the remains of a small car, blackened and twisted, lay in a ditch surrounded by officers. Superintendent Harper, a tall man with a grave demeanour, spotted Miss Marple and Dolly as they approached, and waved them through the cordon, his face etched with strain. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry," he said, tipping his hat. "I'm glad you're here, though it's a grim business. We've got a body in the car, or what's left of it, burned beyond recognition, but we're fairly sure it's a young woman. We're waiting on dental records, but there's a chance it's connected to the Keene case." Miss Marple's eyes drifted to the wreckage, her expression composed but her mind alert. "A young woman," she repeated. "Have you any identification, Superintendent, or any clue as to how she came to be here?" Harper shook his head, his voice low. "Not yet. The car was reported stolen from Danemouth yesterday afternoon. No witnesses to the crash, but a farmer heard an explosion around 1 in the morning. The fire was deliberate. There's evidence of an accelerant. Whoever did this wanted to make sure the body couldn't be identified easily." Dolly gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Deliberate? You mean she was murdered like Ruby?" Harper's jaw tightened. "It's too early to say, Mrs. Bantry, but I don't like the timing. 2 dead girls in a matter of days. It's no coincidence. Miss Marple, you've been poking about the Keene case. Any thoughts?" Miss Marple's fingers brushed the clasp of her handbag, her gaze fixed on the charred remains. "It's a bold move, Superintendent, to destroy a body so thoroughly. It suggests panic, or a need to hide something vital. Identity, perhaps, or a connection to Ruby. I'd like to know more about the car's theft, and I think we must consider the possibility that this death was meant to mislead us." Harper's brows rose, but he nodded, respecting her reputation. "Mislead us? You mean a deliberate deception?" Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint, thoughtful smile. "People are rarely what they seem, Superintendent, and neither are their crimes. I'd like to see the site if I may." Harper led them closer, where the wreckage lay like a skeleton in the ditch. The car's frame was barely recognizable, its interior reduced to ash and twisted metal. Miss Marple's eyes scanned the scene, noting the scorched earth, the faint tire marks leading to the ditch, and a glint of something metallic half buried in the grass. She pointed it out to Harper, who retrieved it, a small blackened locket, its chain broken but its clasp intact. "Could be significant," Harper said, bagging it carefully. "We'll have it cleaned and examined. Anything else catch your eye, Miss Marple?" She shook her head, but her mind was alight with possibilities. A locket, a stolen car, a fire set to obliterate evidence. It was a puzzle within a puzzle, and she sensed it was tied to the Majestic Hotel, where Ruby's ambitions had collided with darker desires. "I must return to the hotel," she said. "There are questions that need answering, and I suspect the answers lie with those closest to Ruby." As they drove back to the Majestic, Dolly's voice was tremulous. "Jane, do you really think this is connected? Another girl, burned like ew. That it's too horrible. Miss Marple's expression was grave, her eyes distant. Horrible, yes, but not random. Whoever did this is playing a dangerous game, Dolly. They're trying to bury the truth, but truth has a way of rising, like smoke from a fire. Titpishin. Hotel was quieter than usual. The news of the second death casting a pall over its glittering facade. Guests whispered in corners, their holiday cheer dampened by the spectre of violence. Miss Marple and Dolly made their way to the manager's office, where Mr. Prescott greeted them with a harried air, his bald head gleaming with perspiration. "This is a disaster, Miss Marple," he said, wringing his hands. "First Ruby, now this car wreck. The papers will have a field day. I've had to cancel tonight's dance, and half the guests are talking of leaving. Have you any news from the police?" Miss Marple settled into a chair, her handbag on her lap. "Only that they're investigating, Mr. Prescott. But I'm curious about something you mentioned before, Ruby's connections here. You said she was close to Mr. Jefferson and to Mr. Gaskell. Have you noticed anything unusual in their behaviour since her death?" Prescott frowned, his fingers drumming on the desk. "Unusual? Well, Mr. Gaskell's been his usual self, charming, but a bit distracted. He was in the bar last night, drinking more than usual. As for Mr. Jefferson, he's taken it hard, keeps to his suite, barely speaks. Mrs. Jefferson's been managing him, but she looks strained. And Josie, well, she's been a rock, keeping the dance troupe together. But I caught her crying in the staff room yesterday. Said it was just grief, but it seemed personal." Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing away the details. "And this car wreck? Has anyone at the hotel mentioned a missing girl? Perhaps a guest or a staff member?" Prescott shook his head. "No one's reported anything. But I did hear something odd. One of the maids said she saw a girl in a school uniform near the service entrance yesterday afternoon, talking to someone in a car. She thought it was strange, but didn't report it. Could that be related?" Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained serene. "It could, Mr. Prescott, thank you. I'd like to speak with that maid, and then with Josie Turner. The maid, a nervous girl named Ellen, confirmed the story in halting tones. She was young, miss, maybe 16, with plaits and a blazer. I didn't hear what they were saying, but she got into the car. A small one, dark-coloured. I thought she was a guest's daughter, but I haven't seen her since." Miss Marple thanked her, her thoughts racing. A schoolgirl, a stolen car, a burned body. It was a chilling sequence, and she suspected the girl was no random victim. She recalled a name from the village gossip. Pamela Reeves, a local schoolgirl reported missing 2 days ago. Could she be the key? Their next stop was the ballroom, where Josie Turner was adjusting costumes for the next performance. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed, but she greeted them with a forced smile. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry, I suppose you're here about the car wreck. It's awful, but I don't see how it's my business." Miss Marple's voice was gentle but firm. "It may be everyone's business, Miss Turner. The police believe the victim was a young girl, possibly connected to Ruby. Did Ruby ever mention a friend, perhaps a younger girl, who might have been involved in her plans?" Josie's hands stilled, and her eyes flicked to the side. "A younger girl? No, Ruby didn't have friends like that. She was all about the hotel crowd. Gaskell, Jefferson, that Bartlett boy. If there was a girl, I didn't know her. Miss Marple's gaze was steady, her intuition tingling. And the night Ruby died, did she say anything about meeting someone outside the hotel? Perhaps someone unexpected? Josie's jaw tightened, and she turned back to the costumes, her fingers trembling. I told you, she said she had a meeting, but she didn't say who. I was busy, Miss Marple. I didn't pry. Her voice was sharp, almost defensive, and Miss Marple noted the crack in her composure. As they left the ballroom, Dolly whispered, "She's lying, Jane. Did you see how she flinched? She knows something about that girl." Miss Marple nodded, her mind alight with a new theory. "I believe she does, Dolly. And I believe the girl in the car was Pamela Reeves, the missing schoolgirl. But why was she killed, and why now? It's as if someone is tying up loose ends, or creating a diversion." Their final stop was the police station in Danemouth, where Superintendent Harper was reviewing reports. He greeted them with a nod, his face grim. "We've got an identification, Miss Marple. Dental records confirm the body in the car is Pamela Reeves, a 16-year-old from St. Mary Mead, reported missing by her parents 2 days ago. We're treating it as murder, but the fires made it hard to pin down the cause of death." Miss Marple's heart sank, but her resolve hardened. "Pamela Reeves," she said. "Superintendent, I heard from a maid at the Majestic that a girl matching Pamela's description was seen getting into a car yesterday afternoon, and I understand Pamela was at the hotel recently for a film audition. Could that be connected to Ruby?" Harper's eyes widened. "A film audition? We didn't know that, but it's a lead. We'll question the hotel staff again. Any thoughts on how this fits, Miss Marple?" Miss Marple's voice was low, her words measured. "I think, Superintendent, that Pamela's death was no accident. She was killed to hide something, perhaps a mistake, perhaps a connection to Ruby's murder. The fire was meant to obscure her identity, but it's also a clue. Someone at the Majestic knows more than they're saying, and I suspect it's more than one person working together." Harper rubbed his chin, his respect for her growing. "A conspiracy, eh? That's a bold theory, but I'll keep it in mind. We're digging into Pamela's movements, and we'll re-interview Gaskell, Josie, and the Jefferson family. Anything else you'd suggest?" Miss Marple's eyes were distant, her mind weaving a tapestry of deceit. "Watch Josie Turner closely, Superintendent. She's grieving, but she's also afraid. And find out if Pamela was seen with anyone from the hotel before she disappeared. The truth is there, waiting to be uncovered." As they drove back to St. Mary Mead, the stars emerging in a velvet sky, Dolly's voice was hushed. "2 girls, Jane, Ruby and Pamela. It's too much. Who could do such a thing?" Miss Marple's expression was grave, her thoughts a storm of connections. "Someone who sees people as obstacles, Dolly. Someone who values wealth or power or safety above all else. But they've made a mistake, and mistakes are my specialty." Back at Gossington Hall, as the fire crackled and the village slept, Miss Marple sat alone, her knitting untouched. Pamela Reeves's death had shifted the puzzle, revealing a darker, more desperate hand at work. She thought of a girl in her village years ago who had trusted the wrong person and paid a price, not with her life, but with her future. "People never change," she murmured, her eyes fixed on the flames. But neither does justice. Chapter 8. The Art of Deception. The morning mist clung to the fields of St. Mary Mead, softening the outlines of hedgerows and cottages as if to shield the village from the grim realities unfolding in its midst. Miss Jane Marple, seated at the breakfast table in Gossington Hall, sipped her tea with a calm that belied the storm of thoughts in her mind. The discovery of Pamela Reeves's charred body in a stolen car had cast a new, sinister light on Ruby Keane's murder, transforming the case from a single act of violence into a tapestry of calculated deceit. Dolly Bantry, opposite her, buttered a slice of toast with unnecessary vigour, her face a mixture of indignation and unease. "It's monstrous, Jane," Dolly said, her voice sharp. "2 girls dead, and the police still chasing their tails. Superintendent Harper was here last night, muttering about Pamela's audition at the Majestic, but he's no closer to catching anyone. Do you really think it's the same killer? And what's it all for?" Miss Marple set down her teacup, her eyes bright with a quiet intensity. "It's not just one killer, Dolly. I'm almost certain. The deaths of Ruby and Pamela are linked, but not in the way we first imagined. There's a design here, a deliberate artifice, and it's meant to mislead us. I must return to the Majestic today. The truth lies there, in the shadows of those who knew both girls." Dolly's brows rose, but she nodded, her trust in her friend unshaken. "I'll come with you, of course. But, Jane, what do you mean by artifice? You think someone's playing a game with us?" Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint, wistful smile. "Not a game, my dear, but a performance. Someone has woven a story, and we've been reading the wrong lines. Let's finish breakfast and be on our way. We have much to uncover." The drive to Danemouth was swift, the autumn air crisp, and the sea a distant shimmer on the horizon. The Duchess Majestic Hotel, with its gleaming white facade and air of forced gaiety, seemed to Miss Marple a stage set for tragedy, its polished surfaces hiding a multitude of sins. As they entered the lobby, the hum of conversation was subdued, the guests' usual cheer tempered by the news of a second death. Miss Marple's eyes scanned the room, noting the nervous glances, the whispered exchanges, and the absence of certain familiar faces. Mark Gaskell, for one, was nowhere to be seen. Their first task was to revisit Josie Turner, whose guarded demeanour had piqued Miss Marple's suspicions. They found her in the hotel's rehearsal studio, a small room off the ballroom where mirrors lined the walls, and a gramophone stood silent. Josie was alone, adjusting a pile of sheet music, her movements precise, but her face drawn with fatigue. When Miss Marple and Dolly entered, she looked up, her dark eyes wary. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry," she said, her voice flat. "I suppose you're here about that poor girl in the car. I've told the police I don't know anything about her. Why do you keep coming back?" Miss Marple settled onto a chair, her handbag on her lap, her expression one of gentle concern. "Because you were Ruby's cousin, Miss Turner, and her closest confidant. And now we have Pamela Reeves, a schoolgirl who was seen at this hotel, possibly connected to Ruby. I believe you know more than you've shared, perhaps out of loyalty or fear. Won't you help us find the truth?" Josie's hands stilled, and for a moment her composure wavered, a flicker of anguish crossing her face. "I've told you, I don't know any Pamela. Ruby never mentioned her. She was always talking about her big plans. Films, stage, men like Gaskell or Jefferson. But No schoolgirls. If this Pamela was here, it's nothing to do with me. Miss Marple's gaze was steady, her voice soft but insistent. Yet Pamela was at the Majestic, Miss Turner, for a film audition, and Ruby, we know, was ambitious, perhaps reckless. Is it possible she involved Pamela in one of her schemes, perhaps without your knowledge? Josie's jaw tightened, and she turned away, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. Ruby was reckless, yes. She'd talk to anyone, chase any opportunity. But I didn't keep her on a leash. If she met this girl, she didn't tell me. I was busy keeping the dance troupe together, covering for her when she flitted off. That's all I know. Dolly, less patient, leaned forward. But you must have noticed something, Josie. Ruby was your cousin, and now Pamela's dead too. If you're protecting someone, it's not helping anyone. Josie's eyes flashed, and she rounded on Dolly, her voice sharp. Protecting someone? I'm protecting myself, Mrs. Bantry. This hotel is my livelihood, and Ruby's death is dragging us all down. I'm not hiding anything. I'm just trying to survive. She stopped, her breath ragged, and turned back to the sheet music, dismissing them with a jerk of her head. Miss Marple rose, her expression unchanged, but her mind alight with new insights. Josie's outburst, so raw and defensive, hinted at a deeper fear, a knowledge she dared not voice. "Thank you, Miss Turner," she said. "We won't trouble you further, for now." As they left the studio, Dolly whispered, "She's lying, Jane, or at least holding back. Did you see how she snapped? She's scared of something." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts racing. Scared, yes, but not just for herself. There's a loyalty there, or perhaps a debt. We must look elsewhere for now. Pamela's audition is the key. Their next stop was the hotel's administrative office, where Mr. Prescott, the manager, was buried in paperwork, his face a study in exasperation. He greeted them with a weary nod, clearly worn down by the police's repeated visits and the hotel's faltering reputation. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry," he said, pushing aside a ledger. "I assume you're here about the Reeves girl. The police have been hounding me, but I've told them all I know." Miss Marple smiled, her demeanour disarming. "I'm sure you have, Mr. Prescott, but we're trying to understand Pamela's connection to the hotel. We've heard she was here for a film audition. Can you tell us anything about it?" Prescott frowned, rubbing his bald head. "An audition, yes. It was about a week ago. Some film company scouting for extras. They used one of our meeting rooms, put up a notice in Danemouth. A few local girls showed up, Pamela among them. He didn't oversee it myself, but the organizer, a Mr. Rudd, I believe, spoke to the girls, took their photographs, and promised to be in touch. That's all I know." Miss Marple's eyes flickered with interest. "Mr. Rudd, you say? Was he connected to anyone at the hotel, Ruby perhaps, or Mr. Gaskell?" Prescott shook his head. "Not that I know of. Ruby wasn't involved, as far as I heard. She was busy with her dancing and her social engagements. Gaskell might have known about it. He's got a finger in every pie. But I've no evidence of that." Miss Marple thanked him, her mind turning over the new name. A film audition. A schoolgirl drawn to the glamour of the Majestic. A stolen car. And a fire. It was a sequence that suggested not just opportunity, but intent. "We must find this Mr. Rudd," she said to Dolly as they left the office. "And I think it's time we spoke to Mark Gaskell again. His absence today is curious. They found Gaskell in the hotel's conservatory, a glass-walled space filled with potted palms and wicker furniture. He was reading a newspaper, a cigarette, smouldering in an ashtray, but his posture was tense, his eyes darting to the door as if expecting an interruption. When Miss Marple and Dolly approached, he folded the paper with a forced smile, rising to greet them. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry," he said, his voice smooth but strained. "I heard about the car wreck. Terrible business. I suppose you're here to ask more questions?" Miss Marple settled into a chair, her handbag on her lap, her expression mild but her gaze piercing. "Indeed, Mr. Gaskell. The death of Pamela Reeves has raised new concerns, and we're trying to understand her connection to Ruby. You were close to Ruby, and you're a man who notices things. Did you ever see her with a younger girl, perhaps at the hotel?" Gaskell's smile tightened, and he lit another cigarette, exhaling a plume of smoke. "A younger girl? No, can't say I did. Ruby was always surrounded by admirers, myself included, I'll admit. But they were hotel guests, not schoolgirls. If this Pamela was here, it's news to me." Dolly, her patience thinning, leaned forward. "But you knew about the film audition, didn't you? Pamela was here for it, and Ruby was ambitious. Surely you'd have heard if they crossed paths." Gaskell's eyes narrowed, but he kept his tone light. "An audition? Oh, I heard about it. Some third-rate film company sniffing around. Ruby might have mentioned it, but she wasn't involved. She had bigger dreams than playing an extra. As for me, I'm a businessman, not a casting agent. I didn't pay it any mind." Miss Marple's voice was gentle, almost coaxing. "And the night Ruby died, Mr. Gaskell, when you saw her at the bar, did she mention anything about a film, or a meeting that might have involved someone like Pamela?" Gaskell hesitated, his fingers tapping the armrest. "She said she was meeting someone, yes, but it was vague, something about her career. I didn't press her. Ruby was always spinning plans. I saw her at 9, danced a bit, then went to the card room. That's the last I saw of her." Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing away his evasiveness. "Thank you, Mr. Gaskell. One last thing. Have you ever met a Mr. Rudd, the man who ran the audition?" Gaskell's face was a mask, but his eyes flickered. "Rudd? Doesn't ring a bell. Sorry, ladies, I've got a meeting to get to." He rose abruptly, tossing his cigarette into the ashtray, and strode out, leaving a trail of unease in his wake. Dolly's voice was low as they left at the conservatory. "He's lying, Jane. Did you see how he dodged that last question? He knows something about Rudd. I'd bet my best hat on it." Miss Marple's expression was thoughtful, her eyes distant. "Perhaps, Dolly, but it's not just what he knows. It's what he's afraid of. I think it's time we tested a theory. We must speak to Superintendent Harper." At the Danemouth police station, Harper greeted them with a nod, his desk cluttered with reports. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry," he said, rubbing his eyes. "We've tracked down this Rudd fellow, a small-time producer, left the hotel days ago. No record of him meeting Ruby or Pamela, but we're checking his contacts. Anything new from your end?" Miss Marple settled into a chair, her voice low and deliberate. "Superintendent, I believe we're dealing with a deception, a deliberate swapping of identities. What if the body in the library isn't Ruby Keene at all, but Pamela Reeves, dressed to look like her? And what if Ruby was killed later? Her body burned in the car to hide the truth. Harper's brows shot up, but he leaned forward, intrigued. A swap? That's a bold idea, Miss Marple. But the dental records from the library body matched Ruby's, and Pamela's matched the car. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. Matched, yes, but not perfectly, I suspect. Dental records can be manipulated or misinterpreted, especially if the police are looking for confirmation. Pamela was young, impressionable, perhaps lured to the hotel by a promise of fame. She could have been killed in Ruby's place, her body dressed in Ruby's clothes to mislead us. Ruby, meanwhile, was kept alive until her death could be staged to look like an accident. Dolly gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Jane, that's brilliant! But why? Who would go to such lengths?" Miss Marple's eyes were hard, her voice steady. Someone who needed Ruby out of the way, but also needed time to secure something. Conway Jefferson's money, perhaps, before his plans to make her his ward were finalized. Mark Gaskell has debts. Josie Turner has ambitions, and even Adelaide Jefferson might fear losing her place. But I suspect a partnership, Superintendent, a cold, calculated alliance. Harper rubbed his chin, his respect for her growing. It's a theory, Miss Marple, and a damned good one. We'll recheck the dental records, and I'll have my men dig into Gaskell's finances and Josie's movements. Anything else you'd suggest? Miss Marple's voice was soft, almost a whisper. Watch them closely, Superintendent, but don't alarm them. Let them think they're safe. The guilty will betray themselves, given time. As they drove back to St. Mary Mead, the countryside cloaked in dusk, Dolly's voice was hushed. Swap, Jane. It's so clever, so cruel. Do you really think it's possible? Miss Marple's expression was grave, her thoughts a storm of connections. Possible, Dolly, and probable. People will do anything to protect what they value. Money, status, freedom. But they forget that lies are fragile, and the truth is relentless. Back at Gossington Hall, as the fire crackled and the village slept, Miss Marple sat alone, her knitting untouched. The art of deception was clear now. A double murder disguised as a single crime. A performance meant to fool them all. She thought of a woman in her village years ago who had lied to save her lover, only to see her carefully crafted story unravel. "The heart betrays itself," she murmured, her eyes fixed on the flames. "And so will they." Chapter 9. The Trap is Set. The pale light of a late autumn morning filtered through the lace curtains of Gossington Hall, casting delicate patterns on the polished floor of the drawing-room. Miss Jane Marple sat by the window, her small figure wrapped in a shawl, her knitting needles idle in her lap. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke from the village, but her thoughts were far from the tranquil scene outside. The murders of Ruby Keene and Pamela Reeves had woven a web of deception that stretched from the glittering halls of the Majestic Hotel to the quiet lanes of St. Mary Mead. And Miss Marple was now certain that the key to unravelling it lay in a carefully orchestrated trap. Her eyes, bright and unyielding behind her spectacles, betrayed the resolve of a mind that had seen through human folly time and again. Dolly Bantry entered, her face a mixture of anticipation and nerves, clutching a letter from the Morning Post. "Jane, you're up early," she said, settling into a chair. "I've just had word from Superintendent Harper. He's rechecking the dental records, as you suggested, and he's got men watching Gaskell and Josie. But he says there's no new evidence yet. What's our next move? I can't bear this. Waiting! Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint, thoughtful smile. Waiting, Dolly, is sometimes the most powerful move of all. But we shan't wait idly. I've been thinking about the deception we uncovered. The possibility that Pamela Reeves was placed in the library, dressed as Ruby, while Ruby herself was killed later. Her body burned to hide the truth. It's a bold plan, but it's fragile, like a house of cards. One push, and it will collapse. We must give that push. Dolly's eyes widened, her hands twisting the letter. A push? You mean a trap, don't you? Oh, Jane, how thrilling! But how will we do it? And who are we trapping? Gaskell, Josie, both? Miss Marple's fingers brushed the edge of her handbag, her voice low and deliberate. Both, I suspect, and perhaps others. The guilty are bound together by their crime, Dolly, but they're also divided by fear. If we can make them believe their plan is unravelling, they'll turn on each other. I have an idea, but it requires Superintendent Harper's cooperation, and now your discretion. Will you drive me to Danemouth this afternoon? We have work to do. Dolly nodded eagerly, her earlier unease giving way to excitement. Of course, Jane. I wouldn't miss it for the world. But what's the plan? You can't keep me in the dark. Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic, her eyes glinting with purpose. Patience, my dear. All will be clear in time. For now, let's have breakfast and prepare. The stage must be set carefully. The journey to Danemouth was swift, the rolling hills and golden fields a blur, as Miss Marple's mind churned with strategy. The majestic hotel, with its facade of elegance and its undercurrents of ambition, was the perfect setting for the drama she intended to orchestrate. Ruby Keane's murder, she believed, had been a calculated act to prevent Conway Jefferson from altering his will, and Pamela Reeves's death was a desperate attempt to conceal the first crime. Mark Gaskell, with his debts and charm, and Josie Turner, with her loyalty and hidden resentment, were at the heart of it. But their partnership was brittle, built on mutual need rather than trust. A single crack, Miss Marple knew, would bring the whole edifice down. At the Danemouth police station, Superintendent Harper greeted them with a nod, his desk strewn with reports and photographs from the car wreck. His face, lined with the strain of a double murder investigation, brightened slightly at Miss Marple's arrival. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry," he said, rising. "We've got something new. The dental records from the library body. There's a slight discrepancy, not enough to overturn the identification as Ruby Keane, but enough to make us question. Your theory about a swap is looking stronger. What's your next step?" Miss Marple settled into a chair, her handbag on her lap, her voice calm but authoritative. "Superintendent, I believe we can force the guilty to reveal themselves. The killers think they've outwitted us, but they're nervous, watching for any sign that their plan is failing. If we let slip that the police are close to proving the body in the library was Pamela Reeves, not Ruby, they'll panic. Panic leads to mistakes, and mistakes lead to the truth." Harper's brows rose, but he leaned forward, intrigued. "A trap, eh? Risky, but clever. How do you propose we do it?" Miss Marple's eyes were steady, her plan unfolding with precision. "You must spread the word, discreetly, but not too discreetly. that the police are re-examining the library body's identification and expect a breakthrough soon. Let it reach the Majestic, particularly Mark Gaskell and Josie Turner. I suggest you speak to Adelaide Jefferson first, as she's close to both, and let her carry the news. She's loyal to her family, but she's not part of the crime, and her reaction will be genuine enough to stir the others. Then watch them, Superintendent. One of them will act, and that action will betray them. Dolly, unable to contain herself, clapped her hands. It's like something out of a play, Jane. But what if they don't take the bait? Miss Marple's smile was faint, almost wistful. They will, Dolly. The guilty always do. Fear is a powerful motivator, and they're already afraid. Harper rubbed his chin, his respect for her growing. I'll arrange it. We'll have men at the hotel, keeping an eye on Gaskell and Josie. Anything else you'd suggest? Miss Marple's voice was soft, almost a whisper. Be subtle, Superintendent. They mustn't suspect a trap. And if you can, find out if Gaskell or Josie had access to the stolen car before it was taken. That link is crucial. Harper nodded, jotting a note. We're on it. I'll call you tonight with any developments. You're staying at Gossington Hall? Miss Marple confirmed, and they left the station, the weight of their plan settling over them. At the Majestic, the lobby was quieter than usual, the guests subdued by the shadow of two deaths. Miss Marple and Dolly made their way to the reading room, where Adelaide Jefferson sat alone, a book open but unread in her lap. Her auburn hair was neatly coiled, her dress immaculate, but her eyes were tired, as if sleep had eluded her. Mrs. Jefferson, Miss Marple said, approaching with a gentle smile. Might we have a word? It's about the recent tragedies. Adelaide set the book aside, her expression polite but guarded. Of course, Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry. I've told the police all I know, but I'll help if I can. It's been a terrible time for us all, especially Conway. Miss Marple settled into a chair, her handbag on her lap, her voice warm but deliberate. I'm sure it has, my dear. We've just come from the police, and there's a development that may concern you. They're re-examining the body found in the library, and there's a chance it wasn't Ruby Keene after all, but another girl, Pamela Reeves, perhaps. It's not certain yet, but it changes things, doesn't it? Adelaide's face paled, her hands tightening on the armrests. Not Ruby? But how could that be? The police identified her. Are you saying someone swapped them? Her voice trembled, and Miss Marple noted the genuine shock in her eyes. We don't know yet, Miss Marple said, her tone soothing, but the police are close to an answer. I thought you should know, as it may affect Mr. Jefferson, and Mr. Gaskell, of course. You're close to them both. Adelaide nodded, her composure fraying. Yes, I'll tell Conway. He's been so distraught, and this will only make it worse. As for Mark, he's been restless, but he's not. He wouldn't. She stopped, her eyes darting to the side, and Miss Marple sensed her loyalty warring with doubt. Thank you, Mrs. Jefferson, Miss Marple said, rising. We won't keep you. Please, don't let this distress you unduly. The truth will come out. As they left the reading room, Dolly whispered, She's rattled, Jane. Did you see how she reacted? She's worried about Gaskell. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts racing. She is, Dolly, but she's not our quarry. Her reaction will carry the news to Gaskell and Josie, and that's what we need. Now, let's find a quiet spot to observe. They settled in the hotel's lounge, a spacious room with plushed sofas and a view of the terrace. Miss Marple ordered tea, her eyes scanning the crowd for familiar faces. Within an hour, their patience was rewarded. Mark Gaskell entered, his usual charm replaced by a tense, distracted air. He crossed to the bar, ordered a whisky, and glanced around as if expecting pursuit. Moments later, Josie Turner appeared, her face pale, but her movements purposeful. She approached Gaskell, and though their conversation was too low to hear, Miss Marple noted the urgency in their gestures, the way Josie's hand gripped his arm. "They're frightened," Miss Marple murmured to Dolly. "The seed has been planted. Now we wait for it to grow." That evening, back at Gossington Hall, Miss Marple received a call from Superintendent Harper. His voice was taut with excitement. "Miss Marple, your plan's working. My men at the Majestic saw Gaskell slip into Josie's room after dinner, and they were there for nearly an hour. We couldn't hear what they said, but they're rattled, and we've got something else. The stolen car was seen near the hotel's service entrance the day it was taken, and a witness says a man matching Gaskell's description was nearby. It's not proof, but it's close." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her voice remained calm. "Well done, Superintendent. Keep watching them, but don't act yet. They're on the edge, and they'll make a mistake soon. Have you any news on the locket found at the wreck?" Harper's tone grew grimmer. "We cleaned it up. It's engraved with the initials RK. Ruby Keene, most likely. It's a strong link to the car, and it suggests your swap theory is right. We're checking if Gaskell or Josie had access to Ruby's belongings." Miss Marple thanked him, her mind alight with confirmation. The locket, the car, the panicked meeting, it was all falling into place. She turned to Dolly, who was hovering nearby, her eyes wide with anticipation. "They're crumbling, Dolly," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but resolute. "Gaskell and Josie planned this together, I'm certain. Pamela was killed to masquerade as Ruby, giving them time to kill Ruby and stage her death as an accident. But they didn't count on the locket, or on us." Dolly's voice was hushed, almost reverent. "You're a marvel, Jane. But what about Basil Blake? He was near the hole that night. Could he be part of it?" Miss Marple's expression was thoughtful, her eyes distant. "Basil is a piece of the puzzle, but a minor one. I suspect he was used, perhaps to move Pamela's body, or to provide a distraction. His fear is real, but it's the fear of a pawn, not a king. Gaskell and Josie are the architects, and they're close to breaking." As the night deepened, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting untouched. The trap was set, and the guilty were stirring, their carefully crafted deception unravelling with every nervous glance. She thought of a young couple in her village, years ago, who had conspired to cheat an old man, only to betray each other when the plan faltered. "Fear is a cruel master," she murmured, her eyes fixed on the flames, "and it will lead them to me." The stage was ready, and Miss Marple, with her quiet wisdom and relentless curiosity, was prepared to watch the curtain rise on the truth. Chapter 10. The Confrontation. The grand drawing-room of Gossington Hall glowed softly under the light of its chandeliers, the polished oak panelling and heavy velvet curtains lending an air of solemnity to the gathering within. Miss Jane Marple stood near the fireplace, her small figure wrapped in a lavender shawl, her eyes sharp and unyielding behind her spectacles. The trap she had set at the Majestic Hotel had borne fruit, and now, with the guilty party's nerves frayed by fear, she had orchestrated a final act to unravel the deadly deception that had claimed Ruby Keene and Pamela Reeves. The room was filled with the key players: Mark Gaskell, Josie Turner, Adelaide Jefferson, Conway Jefferson, Basil Blake, and Dinah Lee, each seated in a semicircle of chairs, arranged by Dolly Bantry at Miss Marple's request. Superintendent Harper stood by the door, his grave presence a reminder of the law's watchful eye, while Colonel and Mrs. Bantry hovered nearby, their faces taut with anticipation. The air was thick with tension, the silence broken only by the crackle of the fire and the occasional rustle of fabric as someone shifted uncomfortably. Miss Marple, her hands clasped lightly before her, surveyed the group with a calm that belied the storm of certainty in her mind. The murders, she knew, were the work of a calculated partnership, a scheme born of greed and desperation, and now, with the evidence aligning and the conspirators' alliance crumbling, it was time to lay bare the truth. "Thank you all for coming," Miss Marple began, her voice soft but clear, carrying the weight of authority. "I know this has been a trying time, with the deaths of Ruby Keene and Pamela Reeves casting a shadow over us all. But tonight, with Superintendent Harper's permission, I wish to clarify what happened, and why. Murder, you see, is never a simple act. It leaves traces like ripples in a pond, and those ripples have led us here." Mark Gaskell, seated at the edge of the group, leaned forward, his charming facade strained, his eyes darting to Josie. "Miss Marple, with all due respect, what's the point of this? The police are handling it. Why drag us all here to play detective?" Miss Marple's gaze met his, steady and unflinching. "Because, Mr. Gaskell, the truth requires more than police reports. It requires understanding. Understanding of human nature, of greed, of fear. Let us begin with Ruby Keene, a young woman whose ambition drew her into a dangerous game. She was found strangled in this very house, in the library, a place where she had no reason to be. But was it Ruby at all? A murmur rippled through the room, and Adelaide Jefferson's hand tightened on her armrest. "Not Ruby," she said, her voice trembling. "But the police identified her. How could it not be her?" Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, her tone measured. The body in the library was dressed as Ruby, her gaudy pink gown, her platinum hair, her makeup. But identification is not always certain. Dental records were used, yes, but they were not conclusive. I believe that body was Pamela Reeves, a schoolgirl from St. Mary Mead, killed and placed here to mislead us, while Ruby herself was killed later, her body burned in a stolen car to hide the truth. Conway Jefferson, in his wheelchair, gripped the arms tightly, his face pale. Pamela Reeves? But why? What could that poor child have to do with Ruby? Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her voice remained firm. Pamela was a victim of circumstance, Mr. Jefferson. She was lured to the Majestic Hotel for a film audition, a promise of glamour that a young girl could not resist. But she was in the wrong place at the wrong time, mistaken for Ruby during a critical moment. Her death was a mistake, but it was seized upon as an opportunity, a chance to stage a deception that would protect the true target. Ruby's influence over you. Josie Turner's face was ashen, her hands clenched in her lap. "This is nonsense," she said, her voice sharp but unsteady. "Ruby was my cousin. I'd know if she was alive or dead. You're spinning stories, Miss Marple, with no proof." Miss Marple's gaze turned to Josie, gentle but piercing. "Proof, Miss Turner, is in the details. The locket found at the car wreck, engraved with RK, belonged to Ruby, not Pamela. The stolen car was seen near the Majestic service entrance, where a man matching Mr. Gaskell's description was spotted. And your own behaviour, your guarded grief, your late-night meeting with Mr. Gaskell after the police began questioning the library body's identity, tells a story of fear and collusion." Mark Gaskell shot to his feet, his face flushed. "This is outrageous. You're accusing us based on gossip and coincidence. I was fond of Ruby, yes, but I didn't kill her, or anyone else. And Josie's just grieving. You've got no evidence, just theories." Superintendent Harper stepped forward, his voice calm but authoritative. "Sit down, Mr. Gaskell. Miss Marple's theories have led us to evidence. We've traced the stolen car to a garage where you were seen inquiring about repairs the day before it was taken. And we've got a witness who saw you with Ruby's locket the night she disappeared. Care to explain?" Gaskell's jaw tightened, but he sank back into his chair, his eyes darting to Josie, who avoided his gaze. Miss Marple continued, her voice relentless yet composed. "Let me tell you what happened, Mr. Gaskell, Miss Turner. You were lovers, bound by a shared need. Your debts, Mr. Gaskell, and your ambition, Miss Turner, to secure a future beyond the dance floor. Ruby was a threat, not just to your plans, but to Mr. Jefferson's fortune. When he spoke of making her his ward, perhaps leaving her a legacy, you saw your hopes slipping away. You devised a plan to eliminate her, but it had to be perfect." "Conway," Jefferson's voice was hoarse, his eyes filled with pain. "A legacy? I only wanted to help her, to give her a chance. Did that cost her her life?" Miss Marple's expression was sorrowful, but she pressed on. "It did, Mr. Jefferson, because greed is a cruel master. On the night of the murder, Ruby was lured to a meeting, perhaps with a promise of a film role, or a deal to advance her career. But Pamela Reeves, who had been at the hotel for an audition, was mistaken for Ruby. She was wearing a similar dress, perhaps borrowed or provided. As part of the audition, she was strangled, her body dressed in Ruby's clothes, and placed in the library at Gossington Hall to create the illusion that Ruby was dead." Basil Blake, who had been silent, leaned forward, his face pale. "The library? But how did she get there?" "I was near the hall that night, yes, but I didn't—" Miss Marple's gaze turned to him, kind but firm. "You were used, Mr. Blake, though not as a killer. You were near the hall because you were asked to be, perhaps by Mr. Gaskell, who knew your car and your reputation would draw suspicion. You were told to deliver something or to meet someone, and in doing so, you unwittingly helped transport Pamela's body. Your fear, your evasiveness comes from realizing you were part of something terrible, doesn't it?" Basil's hands shook, and Dinah Lee beside him gripped his arm. I didn't know," he stammered. "Mark asked me to drive a package to the hall, said it was a prank. I left it near the gate, but I swear I didn't know what it was. Dinah's eyes flashed, and she turned to Gaskell. "You used him, you snake! You let Basil take the blame!" Gaskell's face was a mask of defiance, but his voice wavered. "This is absurd. You're twisting everything. I had nothing to do with any package or anybody." Miss Marple's voice cut through the rising tension, steady and inexorable. "But you did, Mr. Gaskell, and you, Miss Turner, helped orchestrate it. While Pamela's body was placed in the library, Ruby was kept alive, hidden, perhaps in a room at the Majestic or a nearby location. You needed time to secure Mr. Jefferson's intentions, to ensure his plans for Ruby wouldn't disrupt your future. But Ruby became a liability. She knew too much, or she grew suspicious, so you killed her, and her body was placed in the stolen car, doused with petrol, and set alight to destroy any trace of her true identity. Josie's face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands, a sob escaping her. "No, no, it wasn't like that. I didn't want to hurt her. She was my cousin." But she wouldn't listen. She kept pushing, saying she'd tell Conway everything. Gaskell rounded on her, his voice a hiss. "Shut up, Josie! Don't say another word!" But Josie was beyond caution, her words tumbling out in a flood of guilt and fear. "It was your idea, Mark. You said we could make it look like an accident, that no one would know. I only wanted to scare her, to make her back off, but you took it too far. And that girl, Pamela, she wasn't supposed to be there." The room fell silent, the weight of her confession hanging like a storm cloud. Superintendent Harper stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "That's enough, Miss Turner. You're coming with us, both of you. We'll take your statements at the station." Gaskell's face was grey, his charm shattered. "You've got nothing," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "This is all her word against mine." Harper's eyes were hard. "Not quite, Mr. Gaskell. We've got the locket, the car, and now Miss Turner's statement. And we're searching your rooms as we speak. I'd wager we'll find more." As the police moved to escort Gaskell and Josie from the room, Adelaide Jefferson rose, her face pale but composed. "Conway, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I should have seen it, should have stopped Mark. I knew he was desperate, but I never imagined—" Conway's hand reached for hers, his voice heavy with grief. "It's not your fault, Addie. I brought Ruby into this with my foolish dreams. I only wanted to help her, but I gave them a reason to kill." Miss Marple's voice was gentle, almost maternal. "You meant well, Mr. Jefferson. The fault lies with those who let greed twist their hearts, and Pamela's death, though a mistake, was no less tragic. Her family will need your kindness now." Basil Blake, still shaken, stood with Dinah's arm around him. "I didn't know," he said again, his voice hoarse. "I thought it was a joke, a stupid prank. If I'd known—" Miss Marple's eyes were kind, but her words were firm. "You were careless, Mr. Blake, but not cruel. Learn from this, and be more cautious in the company you keep." As the police led Gaskell and Josie away, the room seemed to exhale, the tension giving way to a weary sorrow. Dolly Bantry, who had watched in silent awe, turned to Miss Marple, her eyes shining. "Jane, you're a marvel. How did you know it was them, and how it all fit together?" Miss Marple's smile was faint, almost wistful. People are predictable, Dolly, even in their wickedness. I saw it in my village years ago. A man and woman who conspired for gain, only to falter when their trust broke. Gaskell and Josie were bound by their plan, but fear undid them. The locket, the car, their own panic, they left a trail, and I merely followed it. Colonel Bantry, who had been silent, cleared his throat. "Damned fine work, Miss Marple. You've saved us from a scandal, and caught 2 killers to boot. I don't know how you do it." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, but her voice was modest. "I only listen, Colonel, and watch. The truth speaks if you know how to hear it." The guests dispersed. Conway Jefferson wheeled himself to Miss Marple, his face etched with gratitude and pain. "You've given me answers, Miss Marple, but not peace. Ruby deserved better, and so did that poor girl, Pamela. What can I do now?" Miss Marple's hand rested lightly on his. "Honour them, Mr. Jefferson. Help Pamela's family, perhaps, and remember Ruby's spirit, not her end. That is the best we can do." The fire burned low as the room emptied, leaving Miss Marple alone with Dolly. The weight of the confrontation lingered, but so did a quiet triumph. The trap had sprung, the deception exposed, and justice, though cold, was served. Miss Marple picked up her knitting, her needles clicking softly, and thought of the village girls she had known, ambitious, flawed, human, who had trusted the wrong hearts. "The world turns," she murmured, her eyes on the flames, "but some things never change." Chapter 11. The Aftermath. The pale November sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, its feeble rays barely warming the frost-kissed lawns of Gossington Hall. Inside, the house was hushed, the frenetic energy of the previous night's confrontation replaced by a weary calm. Miss Jane Marple sat in the morning room, a cup of tea cooling in her hands, her knitting neatly folded on the table beside her. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows on the walls, but her thoughts were far from the cosy domesticity of the scene, the unmasking of Mark Gaskell and Josie Turner as the architects of a double murder had brought justice, but it had also left a trail of sorrow and disruption in its wake. Ruby Keene and Pamela Reeves were gone, their lives snuffed out by greed, and the ripples of their deaths touched every corner of the village and beyond. Dolly Bantry entered, her usual vivacity subdued, her eyes shadowed with the weight of recent events. She carried a tray of scones, which she set down with a sigh. "Jane, I hardly slept a wink," she confessed, sinking into a chair. "It's all so dreadful. Mark and Josie in custody, poor Conway Jefferson heartbroken, and the village buzzing like a hive. Mrs. Price at the post office says they're calling you a miracle worker, but I can't help feeling empty somehow. Is this what solving a murder feels like?" Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint, wistful smile, her eyes meeting Dolly's with a mixture of sympathy and resolve. "It's never a triumph, my dear, not truly. Justice is necessary, but it doesn't heal the wounds. We've done what we could for Ruby and Pamela, and now we must help those left behind find their way. Tell me, what's the talk in the village today?" Dolly leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, though the spark of gossip was dimmed. "Oh, it's all about Basil Blake, for one. Everyone's shocked he was involved, even if he didn't know what he was doing. They say he and Dinah Lee are packing up, leaving St. Mary Mead for good. Can't say I blame them. The village won't let them forget this. And then there's Conway Jefferson. Mrs. Clement saw him at the church yesterday, looking like a ghost. He's talking about some sort of memorial for Ruby, but no one knows what." Miss Marple nodded, her fingers brushing the rim of her teacup. A memorial is a kind gesture, and it may bring him some peace. As for Mr. Blake, his departure is perhaps for the best. He was a pawn in a cruel game, but he must bear the weight of his carelessness. I think I shall call on him before he leaves, to offer a word of counsel. And we must visit the Majestic again, Dolly. There are loose ends to tie up, for Mr. Jefferson and for Pamela's family." Dolly's brows rose, but she nodded, her trust in Miss Marple unshaken. "You're right, of course. I'll have the car ready after lunch. But, Jane, how do you stay so calm? After all that's happened, 2 murders, a conspiracy, and you facing down Gaskell and Josie like that, I'd be a wreck." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, almost maternal. "I've seen too much of human nature to be surprised, Dolly. People err, they sin, they hurt one another, but they also heal if given time. My part is only to shine a light on the truth, however dark it may be. Now let's have a scone and plan our day." The morning passed quietly, with Miss Marple writing a letter to her nephew Raymond to assure him of her safety, and Dolly tending to household matters. By early afternoon, they were on the road to Basil Blake's cottage, the countryside patchwork of bare fields and leafless trees under a leaden sky. The cottage, with its stark modern lines and red sports car still parked in the drive, seemed out of place in the village's timeless charm, a symbol of the discord Basil had brought with him. Dinah Lee answered the door, her platinum hair tied back, her face free of makeup and etched with exhaustion. She wore a simple sweater and skirt, a far cry from her usual flamboyance, and her eyes were wary but softened by a trace of relief. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry," she said, stepping aside. "Basil's packing, but I suppose you can come in. He's not in trouble any more, is he?" Miss Marple's voice was kind, her demeanour disarming. "No trouble, Miss Lee. I only wish to speak with him before you leave. May we?" Dinah nodded, leading them into the sitting-room, now stripped of its clutter with boxes stacked against the walls. Basil was folding clothes into a suitcase, his movements jerky, his handsome face drawn with shame. He looked up, startled, and set the suitcase aside, running a hand through his dark hair. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice low, I don't know what to say. You saved me, I suppose, by figuring out what really happened, but I feel like a fool." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her handbag on her lap, her eyes steady but compassionate. "You were foolish, Mr. Blake, but not evil. You trusted the wrong person, and that trust was exploited. Tell me, what did Mr. Gaskell ask you to do that night?" Basil sank onto the sofa, his hands clasped between his knees. "It was so stupid," he said, his voice thick with regret. "Mark called me that afternoon, said he needed a favour, something about a prank to liven up the village. He asked me to pick up a package from a spot near the Majestic and drop it near the Hall's gate around 10. He said it was just some old clothes, a joke to spook the Bantrys. I didn't think twice. I was half drunk and it sounded like fun. I left it by the gate, like he said, and drove home. I didn't know. God, I didn't know it was a body." Dinah's hand rested on his shoulder, her voice fierce. "You couldn't have known, Basil. He used you, that snake. If I ever see him again—" Miss Marple's voice cut through, gentle but firm. "Anger won't undo what's done, Miss Lee. Mr. Blake, you've learned a hard lesson, but you're young, and you have time to make better choices. Leave St. Mary Mead, yes, but take this with you. Trust must be earned, and recklessness has a price. You're not a criminal, but you must be wiser." Basil nodded, his eyes glistening. "I will, Miss Marple, and thank you for seeing the truth, for not letting me take the blame." Miss Marple rose, her smile warm but tinged with sadness. "Go with care, both of you, and perhaps choose quieter friends in the future." As they left, Dinah's arm around Basil, Miss Marple felt a quiet satisfaction. A young man had been spared ruin, but the cost had been high. The drive to Danemouth was sombre, the weight of the case pressing on them both. The majestic hotel, once a beacon of glamour, now seemed tarnished, its white facade dulled by the scandals it had harboured. In the lobby, the usual bustle was muted, with guests speaking in hushed tones and staff moving with mechanical efficiency. Miss Marple and Dolly made their way to Conway Jefferson's suite, where they found him by the window, his wheelchair positioned to catch the faint sunlight. His face, lined with grief, softened at their arrival, though his eyes held a lingering. "Pain, Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry," he said, his voice steady but heavy. "I owe you more than I can say. You've brought justice for Ruby and for that poor girl, Pamela. But I can't stop thinking, did my foolishness bring this on? My wish to help Ruby, to give her a future." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her handbag on her lap, her voice gentle but resolute. "You meant only kindness, Mr. Jefferson. The fault lies with those who saw your generosity as a threat. Mark Gaskell and Josie Turner let greed twist their hearts, and Pamela was an innocent caught in their scheme. You mustn't carry their guilt." Conway's hands tightened on the arms of his wheelchair, his jaw firm. "I want to do something, Miss Marple, for Ruby and for Pamela's family. I've spoken to my solicitor about a scholarship in Ruby's name, for young girls with dreams, like hers, and I'll help the Reeves family, money, support, whatever they need. It's not enough, but it's a start." Miss Marple's eyes were warm, her nod approving. "That's a fine gesture, Mr. Jefferson. It will honour their memory and give others hope. Ruby's spirit and Pamela's innocence will live on in that." Adelaide Jefferson, who had been standing quietly by the door, stepped forward, her auburn hair catching the light. "Conway's right," she said, her voice steady but tinged with regret. "I should have seen Mark's desperation, his bitterness. I thought he was just reckless, not a monster. I'm leaving the Majestic, Miss Marple. I need distance from all this for my son's sake." Miss Marple's gaze was compassionate, her words careful. "You did what you could, Mrs. Jefferson. You protected your family, and that's no small thing. Go forward with courage, and let the past teach you, not haunt you." As they left the suite, Dolly's voice was low, almost reverent. "You have a way of making people feel better, Jane, even after such horrors. But what about Pamela's family? Should we visit them?" Miss Marple nodded, her expression grave. "We must, Dolly. They deserve to know the truth, gently told. Let's go now. before we return to St. Mary Mead. The Reeves family lived in a modest cottage on the edge of the village, its garden tidy but bare in the late season. Mrs. Reeves, a worn woman with greying hair, welcomed them with a weary politeness her eyes red from crying. Her husband, a quiet man in a workman's jacket, stood by the hearth, his hands clasped tightly. Miss Marple, with Dolly at her side, explained the truth as kindly as she could. Pamela's unwitting role in a cruel deception, her death a mistake, born of greed and the justice now served. Mrs. Reeves's voice trembled as she spoke. Our Pam was so excited about that audition. She wanted to be a star, like in the pictures. We told her to be careful, but she was so young, so trusting. How could anyone do this? Miss Marple's hand rested lightly on hers, her voice soft, but firm. They were driven by selfishness, Mrs. Reeves, and they've paid the price. Pamela's memory will live on, and Mr. Jefferson wishes to help you, to honour her. You're not alone in this. Mr. Reeves nodded, his voice rough. Thank you, Miss Marple. We heard what you did, how you found the truth. It doesn't bring her back, but it means something, knowing they're caught. As they left the cottage, the sky darkening with the promise of rain, Dolly's eyes were misty. That was hard, Jane, but you were so kind. Do you ever get used to this, telling people their world's been shattered? Miss Marple's expression was sombre, her eyes distant. Never, Dolly. Each loss is its own wound, but we bear it because we must. Now, let's return to Gossington Hall. There's one more task before I go home. Back at the hall, Miss Marple sat with Colonel Bantry in his study, the fire casting a warm glow over the bookshelves and leather armchairs. Arthur, his moustache bristling, poured her a small sherry, his voice gruff with admiration. You've done wonders, Jane. The village is safe again thanks to you. But I confess, I'm still reeling. How did you see through it all? Miss Marple sipped the sherry, her smile faint but genuine. I saw what I always see, Arthur. People with their hopes and fears, their secrets and lies. Gaskell and Josie were clever, but they forgot that truth is stubborn. It clings like damp to a stone, and it always shows through. Arthur chuckled, raising his glass. To your stubborn truth, then. St. Mary Mead's lucky to have you. As the evening deepened, Miss Marple retired to her room, her knitting in hand, but her thoughts elsewhere. The aftermath of the case was settling, like dust after a storm, but the scars remained. Conway's grief, the Reeves' loss, Basil's shame. She thought of a widow in her village years ago who had rebuilt her life after betrayal, finding strength in small acts of kindness. We go on, she murmured, her needles clicking softly. And so must they. The fire burned low, and St. Mary Mead slept, its quiet restored, but forever changed. Miss Marple, with her unassuming wisdom, had brought light to the darkness, and though the cost was heavy, the truth had prevailed, as it always did in her steady hands. Chapter 12. A Quiet Resolution. The soft glow of twilight settled over St. Mary Mead, bathing the village in a gentle hush that seemed to cradle its wounds after the tumult of recent days. Gossington Hall, with its ivy-clad walls and mullioned windows, stood as a sentinel of tradition, its grandeur tempered by the memory of the grim discovery in its library. Inside, the dining room was alight with the flicker of candles, their warm reflections dancing on the polished mahogany table. Miss Jane Marple sat at Dolly Bantry's right, her small figure wrapped in a dove-grey dress, a lace shawl draped over her shoulders. Her eyes, bright and perceptive behind her spectacles, surveyed the small gathering with a quiet satisfaction, though her heart carried the weight of the lives lost and the pain uncovered. The Bantrys had insisted on hosting a modest dinner to mark the resolution of the case, a gesture to reclaim their home from the shadow of murder. The guest list was intimate. Colonel Arthur Bantry, his moustache bristling with renewed vigour. Superintendent Harper, off-duty but still bearing the gravity of his role. And Dr. Haydock, the village physician, whose kind eyes and steady presence had been a comfort through the ordeal. The table was set with Dolly's best china, and a simple meal of roast lamb, minted peas and apple tart promised a return to normalcy, however fragile. Dolly, resplendent in a sapphire gown, raised her glass, her voice warm but tinged with emotion. "To Jane Marple," she said, "whose wisdom and courage brought light to our darkest hour. Without you, we'd still be lost in a fog of lies. Here's to truth, and to peace restored." The others murmured their assent, and Miss Marple inclined, her head, her smile faint but genuine. "You're too kind, Dolly," she said, her voice soft yet clear. "I only did what anyone might, given time and attention. The truth was there, waiting to be seen, as it always is." Arthur Bantry chuckled, his gruff demeanour softened by the evening's warmth. "Nonsense, Jane. You're a marvel, and I'll hear no argument. That business with Gaskell and Josie, swapping bodies, staging a car wreck, it was devilishly clever, but you saw through it like glass. I'd wager Scotland Yard could learn a thing or two from you." Superintendent Harper, sipping his wine, nodded in agreement. "I'll second that, Colonel. Miss Marple, your theory about the body swap was a stroke of genius. We'd have been chasing our tails without you. The dental records are being re-examined, and we're confident now that Pamela Reeves was in the library, not Ruby Keene. Gaskell and Josie are talking, bit by bit, and we've got enough to put them away for good." Miss Marple's fingers brushed the stem of her glass, her expression thoughtful. "I'm glad to hear it, Superintendent, but I confess my heart is heavy for Pamela's family and for Mr. Jefferson. They've lost so much, and justice, though necessary, is a cold comfort." Dr. Haydock, who had been listening quietly, leaned forward, his voice gentle. "You're right, Jane. I visited the Reeveses yesterday. They're shattered, but Conway Jefferson's offer of support, a fund for Pamela's younger siblings, has given them a glimmer of hope. As for Conway, he's a broken man, but he's channeling his grief into that scholarship for Ruby. It's a fine thing, turning loss into something good." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes distant. "It's the best we can do, Dr. Haydock, to honour the dead by helping the living. I saw it in my village years ago, when a family lost their son to a reckless act. They built a small library in his name, and it became a haven for others. Small acts, but they matter." Dolly, ever practical, set down her glass. "Speaking of the village, Jane, it's buzzing again, but in a good way. The gossips have moved on. Mrs. Price is now obsessed with the vicar's new curate, and the milkman's spreading tales about a haunted barn. It's as if Ruby and Pamela never happened, though I suppose that's how villages heal, isn't it? By forgetting." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, her voice low but firm, not forgetting, Dolly, but forgiving. St. Mary Mead will carry this scar, as it carries others, but it will go on, as it must. We all do. The conversation turned to lighter matters. The upcoming church fete, the Bantry's plans for winter holiday. But Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on the case. The dinner was a balm, a moment of connection after the storm, but it could not erase the images etched in her mind. Ruby's ambition, Pamela's innocence, Gaskell's calculated charm, Josie's desperate loyalty. She had unravelled their scheme, but the cost was a reminder of human frailty, a lesson she had learned long ago in the quiet corners of her village. After dessert, the group retired to the drawing-room, where a fire roared in the grate, casting a golden glow over the plush armchairs and faded tapestries. Arthur poured brandy for the men, while Dolly offered Miss Marple a cup of chamomile tea. Superintendent Harper, settling into a chair, fixed Miss Marple with a curious look. "One thing puzzles me, Miss Marple," he said. "How did you know it was a partnership? Gaskell and Josie weren't obvious allies, yet you saw their connection before we had a shred of proof." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes twinkling with a hint of amusement. "It was the way they moved, Superintendent, like dancers in a waltz, each anticipating the other's step. At the Majestic, I noticed their glances, their shared tension, especially after I planted the seed about the body swap. Alone, neither could have managed it. Gaskell had the cunning, Josie the access to Ruby's life. Together, they were formidable, but their bond was their weakness. Fear bound them, and fear betrayed them." Harper nodded, impressed. "You've a knack for seeing what's hidden, Miss Marple. Ever thought of joining the force?" Miss Marple's laugh was soft, almost girlish. "Oh no, Superintendent. I'm far too fond of my garden and my knitting. Besides, I suspect I'm more useful here in the shadows, watching the world go by." Dr. Haydock chuckled, raising his glass. "To the shadows, then, and the sharpest eyes in St. Mary Mead. You've earned a rest, Jane." But rest was not yet in Miss Marple's nature. The next morning she rose early, her small suitcase packed for her return to her cottage. Before leaving, she walked the grounds of Gossington Hall with Dolly, the frost crunching under their feet, the air sharp with the promise of winter. The library, now scrubbed of its grim memory, stood quiet, its windows catching the first light. "It feels different now," Dolly said, her voice hushed. "The hall, I mean. It's ours again, but I'll never walk into that library without thinking of Pamela. Do you think we'll ever forget Jane?" Miss Marple's gaze was distant, her thoughts weaving through the years. "We don't forget, Dolly, but we learn to carry it. The library will hold its stories, Pamela's, Ruby's, even ours, and it will stand long after we're gone. That's the way of things." Dolly's eyes were misty, but she smiled. "You're right, as always. Will you come back soon? I don't know what we'd do without you." Miss Marple's hand rested lightly on Dolly's arm, her smile warm. "I'll be here, Dolly, whenever you need me. But for now, my roses are calling, and I've a new mystery to solve. Why my begonias refuse to bloom." They laughed, the sound a small defiance against the weight of the past, and returned to the house. Colonel Bantry drove Miss Marple to her cottage, a neat little house with a garden that spilled over with colour even in late autumn. As she stepped inside, the familiar scent of lavender and old books enveloped her. a comfort after the chaos of Gossington Hall. Her maid, Cherry, had kept the place spotless, and a fire was already lit in the parlour. Miss Marple unpacked her suitcase, her movements deliberate, her mind still turning over the case. She sat by the window, her knitting in her lap, and looked out at the village green, where children played and the postman made his rounds. St. Mary Mead was itself again, its surface calm restored, but beneath it ran the currents of human nature: love, envy, sacrifice, betrayal. She thought of Ruby, whose dreams had led her to a deadly snare, of Pamela, whose innocence had been her undoing, of Conway, whose kindness had sparked a tragedy, and she thought of Gaskell and Josie, whose greed had bound them to a path of ruin. Her needles clicked softly, the rhythm a counterpoint to her thoughts. She recalled a spinster in her youth, not unlike herself, who had solved a theft in the village by noticing a single misplaced thread in a seamstress's tale. "It's always the small things," she murmured, her eyes on the green. "The glance, the pause, the lie that doesn't quite fit." A knock at the door startled her, and Cherry ushered in the vicar's wife, Mrs. Clement, her face alight with the latest village news. "Miss Marple, you're back!" she exclaimed, settling into a chair. "We've been talking of nothing but your triumph at Gossington Hall. But I've a new puzzle for you. The church flower rota is in chaos, and I'm sure Mrs. Price is sabotaging it." Miss Marple's laugh was warm, her heart lifting at the return to village life. "A puzzle indeed, Mrs. Clement. Let's have tea and sort it out. I'm sure there's a simple explanation." As they chatted, the fire crackled and the world outside spun on. St. Mary Mead, with its secrets and its scandals, was home, and Miss Marple, with her quiet wisdom and relentless curiosity, was its guardian. The case of the body in the library was closed, but others would come, as they always did, drawn by the eternal dance of human folly. She picked up her knitting, her needles flashing in the firelight, and smiled faintly, ready for whatever mystery the village might bring next.